Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My dad keeps faking illnesses to make me stay home with him. Yesterday I found out why. I don't know who else to tell, or what I even expect to happen by posting this. I can't call anyone. He's always around. I'm writing this on my phone, huddled in my closet, hoping the sound of the old house settling will cover the frantic tapping of my thumbs. I feel like a little kid again, hiding from monsters. The difference is this time, the monster thinks it's my dad. Let me back up. I'm 23. I live with my father. It wasn't the plan, obviously. College, job, my own place. That was the plan. But the economy is what it is, and my mom passed a few years back, and he was getting on in years. He's retired, and his pension is just enough to keep the lights on in this old house. It wasn't a bad arrangement. I'd work my shifts at a warehouse downtown, help with bills, and he'd potter around, watch his old movies, and complain about his back. We had a rhythm. It was quiet, maybe a little lonely, but it was normal. The change was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it. At first, it was just nice. My dad, who for the last 5 years had mostly treated the armchair in front of the TV as a natural extension of his body, started moving again. He was always a big guy, a former mechanic, and age had settled on him like a thick layer of dust. But suddenly, the dust was gone. It started about a month ago. He went down to the basement to fix a leaking pipe. I'd offered to do it, but he insisted. Still got some use in these old hands, he grumbled, a familiar refrain. He was down there for hours. I remember calling down once, asking if he needed help, and just getting a muffled, got a handle, in response. When he finally came up, he was smudged with dirt and grime, but he was grinning. A real, toothy grin, wider than I'd seen in a decade. All sorted, he announced, clapping his dusty hands together. He looked invigorated. I just figured he was proud of himself for handling the repair. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and the sound of birds chirping outside. That wasn't unusual. The unusual part was my dad, standing at the stove, humming. He hadn't cooked a proper breakfast since my mom died. He'd usually just pour himself a bowl of cereal and grunt a good morning. "Morning, son," he said, his voice bright. "Eggs." I was surprised, but pleased. "Yeah, sure. Thanks. You're in a good mood." "Feeling spry," he said, flipping the eggs with a flourish that almost sent one to the floor. "Decided I've been sitting around too long. Life's for living, right?" That week, he was a whirlwind of activity. He mowed the lawn, which I usually had to nag him about for days. He cleaned the gutters. He even started oiling the hinges on the doors so they wouldn't creak. I was thrilled. I thought maybe he'd finally pulled himself out of the long, quiet grief he'd been swimming in. I thought I was getting my old dad back. The first hint that something was wrong came a week later. I was getting ready to go out with some friends. It was a Friday night, the first I'd had off in a while. I was putting on my jacket when he came into the living room, wringing his hands. "You're going out?" he asked. His voice had lost its cheerful edge. It was tight. "Yeah, just for a few hours. Grabbing a beer with a couple guys from work." He winced and put a hand on his chest. "Oh, it's just, I'm feeling a bit funny. My chest is tight. Probably just indigestion, but you know." I stopped, my keys halfway in my pocket. His face was pale. I felt a surge of guilt. "Are you okay? Should I call someone?" No, nothing like that," he said quickly, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm sure it'll pass. I wouldn't want to be here alone if it gets worse." So I stayed. I took my jacket off, ordered a pizza, and we watched one of his old black and white westerns. His chest pain seemed to magically disappear the moment I sat down on the couch. I was annoyed, but I told myself he was just getting old and anxious. The next time I tried to leave, a few days later, it was his back. He claimed it had seized up so badly, he couldn't get off the sofa to get a glass of water. I spent the evening fetching things for him, rubbing his shoulders and listening to him groan. The moment my friend called to ask where I was, and I said I couldn't make it, he suddenly felt a little bit better and managed to get up to use the bathroom on his own. It became a pattern. Every single time I made a plan to leave the house, for any reason other than my work shifts, he would develop some sudden, debilitating ailment. A migraine, dizziness, a stomach bug. It was so transparently manipulative that I got angry. We had a fight about it. I can't be your prisoner. I yelled one afternoon after he'd faked a coughing fit to stop me from going to the grocery store. I need to have a life. His face crumpled, not with anger, but with a deep, profound sadness that completely disarmed me. I just need you here, he whispered. Is that so much to ask? I get lonely. What could I say to that? I felt like the world's biggest jerk. I stayed home, again, but the active, energetic dad was still there. In between his sudden episodes, he was a dynamo. He repainted the porch. He fixed the wobbly fence in the backyard. He was up at dawn, gardening with a fervor I'd never seen. He was stronger, faster. He'd carry in all the groceries in one trip, bags hanging off his arms, without even breathing heavily. My dad, who used to get winded walking up the stairs. It was a contradiction I couldn't reconcile. The real fear, the kind that crawls up your spine and lives in the back of your throat, started with the sun. We were in the backyard. He'd been weeding the flower beds my mom had planted years ago, and I was sitting on the steps, scrolling through my phone. It was a bright, cloudless afternoon. The sun was beating down, casting long, sharp shadows across the lawn. I noticed my own shadow, a dark, stretched-out silhouette of a man slouched over a phone. I looked at him, on his knees in the dirt, and I saw the shadow of the rose bush, the shadow of the fence, the shadow of the bird bath, but not his. He was a solid figure in the blazing sunlight, but the ground around him was unbroken, pure bright green. There was no shadow. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. It had to be a trick of the light, an optical illusion. I looked away, then looked back. Still nothing. A perfect, shadowless man in a world full of shadows. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Hey, Dad," I said, my voice sounding thin and strange in my own ears. "Can you give me a hand with this?" I pointed to a heavy terracotta pot on the other side of the patio, a spot in direct, unforgiving sunlight. He looked up, and for a second, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of panic. He shielded his face from the sun with his hand, even though he was already squinting. "In a minute, son. Just want to finish this patch." He never came over. He stayed in the garden, and as the sun began to set, he seemed to follow the receding line of the house's shadow, always keeping himself just inside it. From that day on, I became obsessed. I watched him constantly. I noticed how he never stood by the windows during the day, how he'd find an excuse to move if a ray of sunlight fell across him in the living room, how he always took his walks in the evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon. He was always drawn to the shade, to the dim corners of the house. My worry curdled into dread. The excuses to keep me home became more frantic. Last week, he unplugged my car battery and then feigned ignorance. A couple of days ago, I woke up to find he'd accidentally locked the front door and lost the key, trapping us both inside until he miraculously found it that evening. I tried talking to him. I sat him down in the dim light of the living room 2 nights ago. "Dad, we need to talk." I started, my heart pounding. "You're not acting like yourself. You're different, and you're keeping me here. I'm worried about you." He just stared at me, his face a calm, placid mask. The energetic, smiling man was gone, replaced by something still and watchful. "I'm fine, son. Never been better. And I'm not keeping you here. I just like having you around. A father can't like having his son around." "It's more than that," I insisted, my voice trembling. Ever since you went down to the basement to fix that pipe, you've been different. Something happened down there, didn't it?" His face didn't change, but his eyes hardened. It was like watching shutters close over a window. "Don't be ridiculous. I fixed the pipe. That's all. Now drop it." The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no arguing. The conversation was over. That was when I knew. I knew with a certainty that made me feel sick to my stomach. The truth of what had happened was in the basement. I waited until last night. I pretended to go to sleep at my usual time, lying in bed with my eyes wide open, listening to the sound of the house. I heard him moving around downstairs, the soft, almost silent footsteps that were another new development. My old dad used to stomp around like an elephant. I heard him check the lock on the front door, then the back. I heard him walk past my bedroom door, pausing for a long moment, and I held my breath, my entire body rigid with fear. Then the footsteps receded, and I heard his own bedroom door click shut. I waited for what felt like an eternity, counting the seconds, listening to the old house groan and creak around me. Finally, when I was sure he was asleep, I slipped out of bed. I didn't turn on any lights. I crept down the stairs, my every step a calculated risk. The basement door was at the end of the hall. It was always cold around it. I turned the old brass knob, cringing at the loud click of the latch. I pulled it open and was hit by a wave of cold, damp air that smelled of wet earth and something metallic and vaguely sweet. The smell of decay. My phone was my only light. I switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting a nervous, trembling path down the rickety wooden stairs. I went down one step at a time, my ears straining for any sound from upstairs. The basement was as I remembered it. Concrete floor, stone walls, junk piled in every corner, old furniture under white sheets like sleeping ghosts, boxes of my mom's things, my old toys. The air was thick and heavy. I pointed my light toward the back wall, where the main water line came into the house. That's where he'd been working. I saw his old toolbox lying open on the floor. A pipe wrench was next to it, and the section of copper pipe he'd been working on looked new, clean. He had fixed it, but my eyes were drawn to the floor next to it. Most of the basement floor was concrete, but in this back corner, it was just packed earth, and a large patch of it, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, was different from the rest. The dirt was darker, looser. It wasn't packed down from decades of existence. It was disturbed, fresh. I stood there for a long moment, the beam of my phone shaking in my hand. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house, out of the town, to never look back. But I couldn't. I had to know. I found an old garden trowel and a bucket of rusty tools. I knelt down. The earth was soft, just as I thought. It gave way easily. I started digging. My breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. The only sounds were the scrape of the trowel against an occasional rock and my own frantic heartbeat pounding in my ears. The smell of damp earth was overwhelming, but underneath it, that other smell was getting stronger. It wasn't a deep hole. Maybe a foot down, my trowel hit something soft. Not a rock. I recoiled, dropping the tool. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. I forced myself to reach into the loose soil. I closed my eyes and my fingers brushed against fabric. Denim, the worn, familiar texture of my father's work jeans. I scrambled back, gasping for air, but I knew I had to see. I had to be sure. With tears streaming down my face, I used my hands, clawed at the dirt, pulling it away. First a leg, then a torso, wearing his favorite faded flannel shirt, and then the face. It was him, my dad. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly open. His skin was pale and waxy, and there was a dark, ugly gash on the side of his head, matted with dried blood and dirt. He looked peaceful, in a horrible, final way. He looked like he'd fallen from the stairs, hit his head, and it had all been over in an instant. I stared at his face, the real face of my father, and a sound escaped my throat, a strangled sob of pure horror and grief. He was gone. He'd been gone for a month, lying here in a shallow, unmarked grave, while I'd been living with Whip. Creak. The sound came from the top of the stairs. It was a single, soft footstep on the old wood. Slowly, I turned my head. My phone's light followed my gaze, traveling up the dark, rickety staircase. And he was there. He was standing at the top of the stairs, a dark silhouette against the faint light of the hallway. He was just watching me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes. I was frozen, kneeling in the dirt next to my father's corpse, a cornered animal. He took another step down, then another. He moved with a quiet, fluid grace that my real father had never possessed. The flashlight beam caught his face as he neared the bottom of the stairs. He was wearing my father's pajamas. He had my father's tired, wrinkled eyes. He had my father's graying hair. And he was smiling. It wasn't a malicious smile. It wasn't a triumphant one. It was sad, infinitely sad. A smile full of pity that was more terrifying than any rage. I knew you'd find your way down here eventually, he said. His voice was my father's voice, but without the gravelly, smoke-worn edge. It was smoother, calmer. I'm sorry you had to see this. I couldn't speak. I could only stare, my mind a screaming void. I scrambled backward, away from him, away from the body, until my back hit the cold stone wall. He stopped a few feet away from the shallow grave, looking down the body with that same mournful expression. It was an accident, he said softly. The second to last step. It's rotten. He was carrying the heavy wrench. His balance was off. He fell. He hit his head on the concrete floor right there. It was quick. He didn't suffer. He looked at me, his eyes full of a strange, deep empathy. His last thought, it was for you. He was worried about you. Worried you'd be all alone. My voice finally came back, a raw, terrified whisper. What are you? He tilted his head, a gesture that was so familiar, yet so utterly alien. I'm him, he said, and I'm not. You know how every person casts a shadow? A darker, simpler version of themselves that follows them through the light? Think of me as the other shadow, the one that lives on the other side of the veil. We watch. We exist in the shape of our double. We feel what they feel, their joys, their sorrows, their love. He took a step closer, and I flinched. He stopped. That last thought, he continued, his voice barely more than a murmur. The love he had for you, his fear of leaving you alone, was so powerful. A life cut short, with so much left to give. It created a space, and it pulled me through. I am his love, his duty, his need to take care of you given form. He gestured around the basement. I finished his work. I fixed the pipe. I buried him, so you wouldn't have to. I've been fixing the house. I've been making sure you're safe. I've been trying to be a good father. The words were insane, but in the cold, damp air of that tomb, they felt horribly, undeniably real. My dad is dead. I choked out, tears blurring my vision. Yes, the thing in his skin said, and the sadness in his voice felt genuine. He is, and I am so sorry for your loss. But I am here now. It took another step, and another, until it was standing right over me. It knelt down, so we were at eye level. Its face was inches from mine. I could see every line, every pore of the face I had known my whole life, animated by something I couldn't possibly comprehend. He loved you more than anything, it whispered, its breath cold. And so do I will never leave you. I will take care of you. We can be a family, just like he wanted, forever. And that's where I am now. He let me go upstairs. He walked behind me the whole way. He's in the living room, watching the television as if nothing happened. As if my real father isn't lying in the dirt downstairs. He's waiting for me. I'm locked in my closet. I know I can't escape. The doors are locked, and he is so much stronger than me. He doesn't need to sleep. He'll never get old. He'll never get sick. He'll just be here, taking care of me, forever. I can hear him moving. The soft, quiet footsteps are coming down the hall. He's coming to check on me. He's calling my name. It sounds just like my dad. Story 2. It came out once a year. I'm honestly not quite sure why I'm writing this, or who I'm even writing this to. Maybe just to warn people. About what? I don't even know. Maybe to reach out to anyone with similar experiences. I grew up in a tiny town. I'm not even sure it could be called a town, really more of a village or a hamlet. The kind of place stuck in the 50s where everybody knew each other, and there were more churches and houses. It sounds charming, I guess, but as anyone who lives somewhere like what I've described, you know it's boring at best and torturous at worst. There was only one school for every kid born here from the time they grew out of diapers to the time they graduated, and if they were lucky, left this dump of a place. There were only ever maybe 30 kids in the school at most, and even to this close-knit community, I was an outcast. Not that I minded. Really, I didn't like these kids either. I only really had one real friend, my next-door neighbor, Molly. Our parents were close too, and we often had supper together, which I guess is why we grew so close. But that's not why you're reading this. I don't think you want to know about a lonely and scrawny little boy with no friends in a boring village. My home wasn't boring, really. We had some strange rituals. You could chalk some of it up to just Bible Belt activities. You'd essentially be outlawed if you skipped church on Sunday. Wives would stay home and cook, while husbands would go out and work in a nearby mine. If you didn't have at least 3 of the Bibles our church had hand-scribed, you weren't allowed to go to church. The like. But we also had something else that I found strange. The festival happened once a year. If you're wondering what the festival was. So were all of us. Nobody knew what it was or why we did it. Hell, nobody even knew what happened if we didn't do it. One of our many pastors, Father Sinclair, usually ran the whole thing. From the outside, it could look like a normal church festival. During the day, that's sort of what it was. A group prayer, followed by the dads grilling sausages or burgers, the children running around and throwing a ball around as the moms brought out cookies and chatted. Maybe some music, if Father Sinclair had raised enough money. But by night, things changed. Everybody was a go inside, except Father Sinclair and some volunteers from the school. After they had ensured all residents truly were inside, they completed it. Curious kids who wanted to know what was happening may have pressed their ears to the bedroom windows to hear nothing but silence. Well, until 3:33 in the morning. Every year without fail at 3:33, a loud, screeching-like sound could be heard, followed by otherworldly chanting, followed by silence again. I know that because I was one of those curious kids. Molly and I both were. This story I'm telling took place during our 12th festival. By this time, it had been a few years of Molly and I theorizing what the festival was for. It was maybe a week or so until our next festival. And this year we were dead set on discovering what it was. Maybe we could sneak out during the night portion of the festival? Well, that wasn't for another week. We decided to go through Father Sinclair's office to try and discover dirt on him. After the usual Sunday service, Molly and I took advantage of everyone being distracted by a bake sale to sneak into the upper level of the church. I'm not sure if we were doing this because we were genuinely curious, or if we just liked the thrill of doing something naughty, but either way, I remember my heart being in my throat as we crept into Father's office. Unlocked, Molly whispered as we stifled giggles. You know, if he's so protective of his office, he really should do a better job keeping people out. We both held our breaths as we slowly opened the door, being careful for any creaks. It was kind of underwhelming. Maybe we were expecting something like Satan's lair, complete with tapestries of demons and torture chambers, but it looked just like a normal office. I opened all the drawers of his desk as Molly went through the filing cabinet. Nothing. We were about to give up when I tripped on the carpet. Part of it flipped up when we saw it. There, in the middle of the floor, was a weird symbol. It kind of looked like star. Neither of us recognized it. Okay, maybe it's just a drawing. Maybe he's secretly an artist. Molly said, "Try and make me," who probably looked like I had seen a ghost, laugh. I, still the little religious boy as I've been raised, clutched a Bible I found on Father Sinclair's desk. Mindlessly, I began shifting through the pages. Molly," I said, "these pages are weird." She took the Bible from my hands, furrowing her brow. "I don't recognize any of these verses. I've read the Bible like 1,000,000 times. This isn't right." "Hello, kid," We heard and both jumped back. It was Father Sinclair. If it isn't little Molly McKee and Robert Crane, such curious little ones. Well, not so little anymore. You must be 12 years old by now, is that right? He said as he paced towards us menacingly. Why, yes, Father. Molly said as I shook like a leaf, unable to even say anything. We're sorry we snuck into your office. Nonsense. Nothing wrong with a bit of curiosity, Father said, stomping on the symbol we had recently discovered. He looked at us with a sharp, knowing eye. I could use some curious kids, such as yourselves at next week's festival. How's about it, kids? Would you like to be my volunteers? I started to shake my head no, but he placed a cold hand on my shoulder, a gesture I wasn't unfamiliar with. He did it to everyone in town as a sort of comfort, but it felt much different now. He pressed it hard into my skin, hard enough to leave a bruise. Robert, you and I both know you have much of a choice here, he said as he winked. It's nothing to worry about, really. He pushed us out of his office. Now, run on home. Hug your mothers. Molly and I sat in her room that night, not saying a word. We were too shaken up. Silently, she pulled one of her family's 5 Bibles, the ones gifted to us by Father Sinclair. Then, she reached into the book bag she had brought to church that day. She pulled out the Bible we found in the office. Molly, you took that? He's gonna kill us. I warned. I think he was gonna do that anyways, she said dryly as she opened them side by side. I watched as she seemingly got more and more puzzled. It makes no sense, Rob, she said as she flipped through both books. These books say the complete opposite of each other. I don't know which one to believe. There, that verse is in our Bible. What's it say? I pointed at one, which Molly began reading aloud. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Every year without fail, at 3:33, a loud, screeching like sound could be heard. The volunteers from the school. Molly, I said tentatively, what happens to the volunteers every year? Well, usually they move away. They just go to school or something, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. Molly, I said tentatively again, have we been praying to the wrong God? Eventually, the festival came, and Molly and I, like we should have been, were properly terrified that whole week. When the day came, and then the night, we tried to sneak away, but there was no getting past Father Sinclair. You too, brave volunteers, will stay here, he said, grabbing us tightly by our arms. We sat under the moonlight in a deafening silence. You don't need to lie to us anymore, Sinclair, Molly said, breaking the silence. We know what you're doing. Father Sinclair turned around sharply. He struck us both across the face as I cried out in pain. He smirked. Do you know why you live such fortunate lives? Why we all live such fortunate lives? I do this for us, really. For all of us. And soon, you'll have done this for all of us, too. You should really be proud, he said as he drew that weird star on the ground with a stick. We watched as he lit candles and said weird words. Suddenly, a loud screech caused Molly and I to duck and cover our ears. I guess it was 3:33. When I helped Molly up, I saw it. It towered over us, challenging the height of the trees. A tall, dark figure, horns and all. He looked down at us. Father Sinclair bowed down. Your subject, sir. He pushed us towards him as we tried to run away. He bent down. You have broken the rules, Sinclair. I thought I had made things very clear. In a moment, Father Sinclair had dropped his normal demeanor as I saw fear fill his eyes. What rule? I haven't broken a rule at all. Your subjects, as promised. My conditions, he boomed, that for the life you live, the goods I grant you, you mustn't ever harm a soul again. The souls harmed were to be saved for me. He touched me with his large claw that was hot to the touch. Is this a bruise I see? He turned his attention to Molly and the red mark on her face. Unbelievable. But, sir, Father Sinclair pleaded, getting on his knees. What about the good of my village? All these people praying just for you, because of me. Can we not make another deal? He pondered for a bit. Very well. I may allow another year of prosper to this village, but I will need another sacrifice. Father Sinclair pushed Molly and I forward yet again. He shook his head. Not them. You are the one I'm after. And with that, we watched as he grabbed Father Sinclair with a massive claw and threw him like a doll to the ground as he was consumed by the flames below him. I can still hear his screams to this day. Molly and I stood in shock until the massive being turned his attention to us. And you too, he said, bending down to our level. Go, leave these grounds and do not return. You must get out of here. Confused, but not want to disobey this thing, we both began to leave. I turned back. See you soon? He smirked. Indeed. Story 3. My name is Peter. I was told a treatment saved me from being paralyzed. Now I wish I had been paralyzed. After the accident, I was told a treatment saved me from being paralyzed. Now I wish I had been paralyzed. They said the AI integration was revolutionary. Nerve bypass, full mobility, even enhanced reflexes. It was originally intended for a soldier. They weren't even permitted to use the tech, but it was their only hope. Beyond fixing my paralysis, it was meant to make me stronger, faster, and more agile. It did those things for sure, but something went wrong. My body moves without me now. My hands reach out for people and grip them too tightly before twisting too hard. I want to scream at them to run, to get away, but they only see a friendly man approaching. They can't hear my thoughts, no matter how hard I scream them in my mind. They don't recognize the horror in my eyes. I'm not in control. I'm just a passenger. But the only people who know that are the doctors who ruined my life. Doctors who are now dead. I single-handedly killed each one of them, and there was nothing I could say or do about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You see, before the accident, everyone always commented on how polite I was. I'd even garnered the local nickname Polite Peter. That is, until a random Tuesday in July. I saw a package fall off a truck as it pulled away. I went to pick it up and woke up in a hospital bed hooked up to all sorts of weird technology, wearing almost the same outfit I had on earlier that day, but brand new. And to my horror, I couldn't move a single part of my body. Despite being unable to control my body, I was shocked when my body sat up with me in tow. My eyes open and closed at a rate similar to blinking. But when I tried to choose when to blink, I couldn't, nor could I hold my eyes shut. I was thinking about this when my body turned to face the door, reacting to the sound of it opening. Through the door, my family doctor walked in with a group of other doctors I didn't recognize behind him. They stayed on the other side of the room, far from me by the door, studying me anxiously. My family doctor looked at me with a mix of empathy, concern, and possibly fear painted on his face as he said, "You were in a very serious accident, Peter. An explosion destroyed many parts of your spine and fried your nerve endings." He gave me a solemn look before he continued. Thankfully, after explaining how important you are to this town and to myself personally, as well as, admittedly, a hefty donation to these fine people from the Merriweather Institution, we were able to bring you back from the near brink of death. He took a moment to study my unmoving face before he continued. You have been given a gift, Peter. The Merriweather Institution allowed me to use a toolkit normally reserved only for most dedicated elite soldiers. You have been given the agility to move. What connects your enhanced limbs and muscles to your brain is an AI-integrated pathway built using cutting-edge technology. You were moments from death or a short life lived paralyzed. But this technology not only saved your life, it allows you to move. I sat for a moment, taking this in. Not that I had any other choice. I couldn't move. I was glad at the time to be alive and able-bodied, but I was mad that I had seemingly no control. I couldn't smile at them or respond in any way. I couldn't even blink. I was just as surprised as they were when my body stood up, ripped away the gadgets and tech I was hooked up to, and fluidly walked toward them. As I moved toward them, the group split into two, moving further into the room. My body ignored them as it made its way to the door. As I reached the door, the doctors had all collected back into one group on the opposite side of the room. They looked absolutely horrified, but it looked like they were going to let me leave silently. I wish I could tell you that's what happened, that I walked out of that room and closed the door, but I can't. As my body reached the door, it quickly shut and locked it before turning around to face the scared group huddled on the opposite side of the room. I stood in a position I'd never stood in before in my life. I was poised to attack, in a violent, imposing, and completely foreign stance of aggression. Every person in that room had the right idea, staying far from me. Everyone but the person who had been there every time I felt ill my entire life. While everyone else stood far away, my family doctor stepped forward and said, "Peter, I know it must feel weird, and I know it's not what you're used to, but..." He never got to finish, as my body closed the distance, punching him in the throat before gripping him and slamming his head onto my knee with extreme force. His elderly frame crumbled on the floor as my body reached down. I felt my hands wrap around his neck before they shifted, and I felt a snap like I had broken a large stick or thin tree branch. The doctor stood in shock at first until my body repositioned to face them as I stood back up. That is, until I made my first step toward them. They all immediately tried to run to the left, but my body kicked the examination table in the way to block their path. They stood behind the barrier I created, locked in their fear, before I slowly walked backward to the door, my body never once looking away from them. One by one, they all tried to leave, and one by one, they were brutally murdered until only one doctor remained, a woman who refused to try and leave. I was screaming at them all to run away, but my mouth did not once move. I was begging it to stop, but my body was indifferent to me, and my efforts were in vain. For a moment, my body seemed like it was going to let her live, the woman who was too afraid to leave. But this was a trick. I tried to will my body to leave, and to my surprise, it seemed like the AI was responding as it made its way toward the door. I felt a huge sense of momentary relief as my body unlocked and stepped through the door, a relief that unfortunately wouldn't last, because as soon as the door closed behind my body stepped to the side and stood motionless. I thought I was going to leave, to let her get away, that I had some semblance of control over this form. But I was wrong. My body wasn't leaving. It was pretending to have left and waiting for her to fall into my hands. It could have been 10 minutes or 3 hours later when I heard the door slowly creak, open starred asterisk. She carefully started making her way out of the room when my hands found her. Her perfume smelled nice. I thought to myself, as I wrapped around her from behind and choked the life out of her. I wanted so badly to stop, to let her leave, but my body had other plans. I was imagining that I let her go when I felt her body stop moving, and she fell lifelessly to the floor. I wanted to stop and mourn, to feel the weight of the moment I had just endured, the pain I had inflicted on these poor people who dared make the mistake of trying to save me. But unfortunately, my body had no intention of stopping, as it walked me smoothly toward the exit of the hospital only a few halls away, silently weeping with dry eyes that betrayed my emotions. The automatic doors at the entrance opened for me as I walked through them. Story 4. I spent all night watching old commercials, and now I'm trapped between two realities. I lost my job 3 weeks ago. Jennifer left 2 weeks after that. She said things about timing and needing different paths. But I knew the truth. I'd stopped being a person who moved forward. I became someone who sat on the couch scrolling through a phone, full of memories instead of plans. Now I'm 36 with a back that wakes me up before my alarm. The chiropractor visits stopped when money got tight. Groceries come every other week instead of weekly. The space between necessities fills with late-night nostalgia. Toy commercials from 1994. Station IDs for networks that died before I graduated from high school. Static that sounds like comfort. The algorithm knows what I want better than I do. I spend hours in comment sections where strangers say, "I thought I was the only one who remembered this." I belong there more than anywhere else in my actual life. 3 nights ago, I couldn't sleep. My back hurt, and my thoughts wouldn't stop circling, and everything I hadn't done pressed down on my chest. I opened YouTube at 11, told myself I'd watch for an hour. The sun came up, and I was still watching. The feed pulled me deeper. Fast food jingles, Saturday morning cartoons, sitcoms recorded over family vacations. The colors blurred into VHS haze. That soft fuzz where nothing has sharp edges. The real world waited beyond the laptop screen. Bills on the desk, job listings I should open, the half-empty bed. But the past was louder. At 5:47 a.m., I clicked a thumbnail. 90s snack commercials you totally forgot about. 43 minutes long. Channel with 300 subscribers. Description said VHS rip from 1996. Some tracking issues, mostly clean. I hit play. Dunkaroos, Gushers, kids with Kool-Aid grins and Sugar Rush energy. I watched because watching meant not thinking about the bills. At 31 minutes, something different started. A kitchen lit, brightly lit. A family with oval heads and stick figure limbs. The kind of cheap animation that filled afternoon commercial breaks. The mother set down a tray of enormous cookies. The chocolate chips caught the light and winked. When you want a treat that's sweet and neat, reach for crumbly cookies. The kid bit in. Stars burst across the frame. The family leaned forward together. Mouths opening for the first line of the jingle. A compressed hiss filled the space where music should have been. It wasn't silence or dead air. A specific sound, like the shape of melody, had been scooped out and replaced with white noise. The picture kept moving. The family kept singing their silent song. Crumbly cookies. Available at grocery stores everywhere. Next commercial. Cereal. A cartoon rabbit. Normal sound. I dragged the video back and played it again. The hiss returned in the exact same spot. I checked the comments. Someone had typed out the full jingle in caps lock. Another person said their dad used to sing it on road trips. 3 people argued about whether there was a key change in the bridge. Nobody mentioned corrupted audio. Nobody said the melody was missing. I opened a new tab. Search Crumbly Cookie Jingle. Results flooded back. Clips labeled full version and clean audio. A 10-hour loop. Someone's kindergarten class singing it. I clicked through 6 different videos. Every single one had the same gap. The build-up, the hiss, the finish. I tested different speakers. Headphones. My phone. I cleared my browser cache and tried again. I used a VPN to route through different servers. The hiss stayed constant. The jingle existed in text. It existed in memory. Thousands of people claimed to know it. I could read the lyrics on a dozen wiki pages. I could see the sheet music someone had transcribed, but still I couldn't hear it. Sleep would fix this, I told myself. I kept believing that right up until a phone interview at noon where my voice shook. I forgot a question twice and apologized for being scattered. At 3, I met Derek at the coffee shop on 4th Street. We've been friends since college, bonded over our obsession with commercial archaeology. He collects obscure ads away I collect vinyl records at Skip. He looked up from his phone when I sat down. His expression changed. You look like you haven't slept in days. I haven't. I set my laptop on the table between us. Do you remember Crumbly Cookies? His face brightened immediately. Oh man, yes. My grandma kept them in the pantry. They were fine, nothing special. But that jingle was infectious. My throat tightened. Hum it for me? He laughed. What? I'm serious. Hum the jingle. The laugh died. He studied my face like he was trying to figure out if this was a joke. He didn't understand. You want me to hum the Crumbly Cookie song right now? I watched the commercial last night. The audio cuts out right at the jingle. I've tried every version I can find. Same problem. That's a weird corruption, Derek said. Must be something with the source file that got copied everywhere. Just hum it. He shrugged and started. His voice rose and fell with clear confidence. Where the melody should have been, my brain registered only that same compressed hiss. He finished and smiled, pleased with himself. There. Happy. My hands had gone cold. One more time. Slower. His smile faded. Dude, are you okay? Please. He hummed it again, drawing out each phrase. I focused on every sound. My brain kept trying to fill the gap, searching for the pattern everyone else could hear. It found nothing. You're scaring me a little, Derek said when he stopped. I can't hear it. The words came out flat. I hear you humming. I hear the rhythm. The actual melody doesn't reach me. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand on my forearm. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't vending machine food? I'm not having a breakdown. I didn't say you were. But you need sleep. Real sleep. Maybe talk to someone. He squeezed my arm once and let go. I'm worried about you. We talked about other things after that. He told me about an estate sale where he'd found a box of local car dealership commercials from the 80s. I nodded at the right times and said the right things, and felt the conversation happening somewhere outside my body. When I left, I took the long way home. At 5th and Maple, the corner had changed. I stopped walking, stood there on the sidewalk, staring at a storefront I'd never seen before. Painted windows, cheerful yellow-orange walls, a sign in that aggressive, rounded font from 90s advertising. Cookie Crumble Cafe. The mascot on the glass looked exactly like the cookie from the commercial. Same chocolate chips exaggerated into glossy ovals. Same winking expression. I had walked past this corner 3 times a week for 2 years. There was supposed to be a dry cleaner here. I remember the faded awning, the steady hum of machines inside, the chemical smell that leaked onto the sidewalk. A historical plaque hung beside the door. Brass, slightly tarnished. Cookie Crumble Cafe, EST 1997. Through the window, I could see someone wiping down the counter. A woman in her 50s looked up and smiled. The display case held enormous cookies identical to the ones from the ad. The walls were that same yellow-orange. I went inside. A bell chimed above my head. "Help you?" the woman asked. "When did this open?" She blinked. 28 years ago this November. My mom started it right after the Crumbly Cookie campaign took off. She loved that jingle so much, she wanted to make a little place that felt like it. There was a dry cleaner here. Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Not that I remember. Maybe a long time ago. This was an empty lot when Mom bought it. I looked at the photos covering one wall. Grand opening, 1997. A younger version of this woman standing beside an older woman, both holding oversized cookies. Birthday parties from the early 2000s, kids with frosting-smeared faces. A newspaper clipping about local businesses weathering the 2008 recession. "You okay?" the woman asked. "Fine. Sorry." I left without buying anything. My hands shook as I walked home. I kept them in my pockets so nobody would see. Once I was inside my apartment, I opened Google Maps, searched the address, clicked through Street View history. 2023, Cookie Crumble Cafe, painted mascot on the window. 2019, same building, slightly faded paint. 2012, same building, brighter colors. 2009, the oldest available image. Same building, same sign, same mascot, cookie winking from the glass. I opened my laptop and started taking screenshots. Every search result, every timestamp, every Street View image. I saved links. I documented everything I could find. The laptop felt like the only solid thing left in the world. I searched for the jingle again that night. Articles, playlists, wiki pages, Spotify links. Every single source insisted the song existed, that everyone knew it, that it had been inescapable in the late 90s. In a comment thread on a nostalgia forum, someone mentioned the Night Trippers. Fun fact, they sang the Crumbly Cookie jingle before they made it big. That's what launched their whole career. I knew the Night Trippers. I'd listened to them constantly in college when I was barely holding myself together. Quiet folk songs with long silences between chords. Songs about empty highways and basement apartments, and the particular loneliness of 3 a.m. I owned both their albums. I went to the shelf and pulled out basement hymns. The cover looked right. Their faces in shadow, photographed in what looked like a concrete stairwell. I flipped it over. The track listing had changed. Sirens on the Highway had become After the Fame. Basement Light was now Cookie Crumbs and Heartbreak. Every title had shifted into something bright and cheap and referential. My hand started shaking so hard I almost dropped the case. The liner notes thanked the Crumbly Cookie campaign for launching their career. I didn't remember that. I remembered reading these same liner notes 100 times. They'd thanked a college radio DJ in Madison and a house show venue that had let them sleep on the floor. I put the disc in my laptop and pressed play. The first track started. Their voices, same harmonies, but the lyrics had turned saccharine. Childhood memories, chocolate chips melting on the tongue, television jingles that stayed with you forever. Every song twisted around the same center. A folk album rewritten to celebrate something that shouldn't have mattered. I ejected the disc, held it in both hands. The surface reflected my face back at me. For a moment, I didn't recognize a reflection. A half-memory surfaced. My 10th birthday. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart, everything all right? Do you remember my 10th birthday?" She laughed. "The Pokemon cake. You were so mad because the bakery was sold out. So I made one myself. Pikachu looked like a yellow blob, but you loved it anyway. Why? Did you make anything else? Those crumbly cookies you kept begging for. You sang that jingle all day long. Drove your father up the wall." She started to sing, her voice going high and childish. Crummy, cookie." I heard her voice. I heard her breath between syllables. I heard the rhythm of the words. The melody never reached me. Just the hiss, filling the space where music should exist. "Alex, you still there?" "Yeah, just tired. You should look at the pictures Emily posted in the family album. You look so happy." I hung up and found my sister's Facebook. Scroll back to a post from 6 years ago, a throwback photo set. There I was at 10, grinning over a chocolate cake shaped like a deformed Pikachu. Oversized cookies circled the plate. In one photo, my mother and I had our mouths open mid-song. The caption, "Remember when Alex made us all sing the Crumbly Cookie jingle?" Classic. I didn't remember any of it. The colors in my apartment had changed. They looked even and flat, like someone had color-corrected reality and pushed the saturation up high. The books on my shelf looked painted on. The shadows under my desk looked printed. I walked to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. Same features, same face, but it looked rendered instead of real. The light didn't behave the way light should behave. A rhythm had started pressing behind my eyes. Words forming in that pattern. Crummy, cookie. My brain kept trying to fill the missing melody. It kept failing. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I blinked, the walls flattened further. My desk lost depth. I reached out and touched the corner where it met the wall. My fingers went through the connection like it wasn't quite there, like the joint existed in a space slightly to the left of where my hand could reach. I pulled back, stared at my hand. The skin looked normal. The room looked normal. I touched the corner again. Solid this time. By morning, I couldn't make myself step into the hallway. The air outside my door had taken on that glossy quality of animation. The carpet pattern repeated like background art, the same 4 tiles over and over. When I looked at it straight on, it seemed fine. When I looked away and back, I could see the loop. I opened the screenshots I'd taken to the wiki page. They'd changed. Extra paragraphs now, longer edit history. The photo of the bakery showed graffiti on the side wall that hadn't been there before. The date of the grand opening had shifted back to 1996. I closed the files and opened them again. More changes. The building looked older. The historical plaque mentioned a different founder. The world was deciding on a version of events. I was the last error it needed to correct. I called Derek again. "Tell me the truth," I said, "about the Crumbly Cookie jingle. Do you actually remember it?" "Jesus, Alex. Yeah, of course I do. Are you? Sing it. Right now." Silence on the other end. Then his voice cautious. You started singing it on the bus in 7th grade. We drove Mrs. Patterson insane with it. You remember that, right? I didn't. Sing it anyway. He sang. His voice rose and fell, confident in every note. I heard the shape of melody without the melody itself. Just a hiss. Sitting in my skull, where music should have been, my throat felt tight, like something was trying to push up from inside, like my vocal cords wanted to join him. Did you hear it? He asked when he finished. Yes, I lied. I think you should talk to someone. Like, professionally. This isn't normal, man. I know. Do you want me to come over? I'm fine. Thanks. I ended the call. The phone screen lagged when I touched it. Each swipe delayed by half a second. Every object in my apartment had turned to art. No depth, just color and light arranged in the shape of things. That was 2 days ago. I haven't left the apartment since. I can't. The world outside, my door, doesn't match the one I came from. I tested it this morning. Opened the door just enough to look through. The hallway carpet is a different color now. Beige instead of blue. The apartment numbers have changed fonts. For C across from me used to be occupied by an older man who played saxophone at odd hours. The nameplate now says Henderson Family, in cheerful script I've never seen before. I closed the door and checked my lease. It says the building was renovated in 2018, new carpets and updated signage. I moved in during 2022. The carpets were already blue when I got here. My lease now says they've always been beige. I can feel the pressure constantly. The rhythm loops behind every thought. Crum-o-y, crum-o-y. Kooky. My mouth shapes the words without permission. I catch myself humming and have to physically clap my hand over my lips to stop, because I don't know what sound I'm making. My childhood memories have started splitting. I remember my 10th birthday with the Pokemon cake and no cookies. I also remember my 10th birthday with the Pokemon cake and crumbly cookies and singing the jingle until my throat hurt. Both memories exist in my head at the same time. Both feel real. The second set is getting stronger. I tried to leave again an hour ago. Made it 3 steps into the hallway before the vertigo hit. The floor tilted. The walls breathed. I stumbled back into my apartment and slammed the door. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was blue again. Blue carpet, old font on the apartment numbers. The nameplate across from me was blank, no name at all. I opened the door. Beige carpet, new font, Henderson Family. I'm caught between 2 versions of the same place. 1 foot in the world I remember. 1 foot in the world that's replacing it. Every time I try to step fully into either one, something pulls me back. The screenshots I took keep changing. I'll look at a saved image, and it will be different from the last time I checked. But I can still see the old version in my head. I remember both. The memory I came from, and the memory this world insists I should have. I don't know which one I am anymore. I'm writing this down because I need someone to understand what's happening. If you're reading this and you remember a world without crumbly cookies, you need to document it now. Take screenshots. Write everything down. Because the world will try to correct you. It will rewrite your past to match everyone else's. And if you're unlucky like me, you'll end up stuck between the 2 versions, unable to move forward in either one. I can't hear the jingle. That gap is the only thing keeping me anchored to where I came from. But the pressure keeps building. My brain keeps searching for the melody. My throat keeps trying to sing. I don't know what happens when the gap finally closes. Maybe I'll slip completely into this new world. Maybe I'll be able to leave the apartment and walk down that beige hallway and live a life where I've always known that jingle. Or maybe I'll stay here forever, trapped in the space between, remembering 2 lives that can't exist in the same reality. The vertigo is getting worse. I stood up 10 minutes ago and the floor rippled like water. The walls flickered between flat and solid. I can see both versions now without trying. The painted reality and the real one underneath, fighting for the same space. I'm still here. I can still type. But I don't know how much longer I have before the choice gets made for me. If this happens to you, don't try to remember. Don't let your brain fill in the gaps. The moment you hear that melody, The moment you remember what everyone else remembers, you'll belong to their world completely, and you'll never find your way back to your own. Story 5. My new neighborhood is a little quirky. I went through a bad breakup. Couldn't get the guy to leave me alone. He was showing up at my work, home, even my mom's house. I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I started looking at states hours away from my hometown. Not a city, but not too small of a town either. I wanted to be able to walk the sidewalks and get to local shops. Moving to somewhere I knew no one, it would be nice to live in a neighborly town. I finally settled on a little town in the Pacific Northwest. I flew out to look for a job and a place to live. I spent the first few days walking around the main town, applying at a few shops. I quickly found a smaller book manufacturing company. I had an interview and fit what they were looking for. After that was settled, I set about finding where Cal, my little tuxedo cat, and I would call home. I started exploring a bit farther from the main town. There were some cute, quiet places, but they weren't calling to me. Then I found my new little neighborhood, Jerusalem Street. It was settled just a bit back from the main road. 3 rows of townhouses in a cul-de-sac. You could tell they had some age, but all were well kept, and it was a lovely little street. Not the near identical wash of beige and gray had become so common. Most were light pastels. It looked like people liked living here. Lots of trees and gentle light, dappling the ground underneath. Quiet, a couple people out with their dogs, or walking to town. A small area in the center with a bird feeder, a bench, and board that people could leave flyers or notes on. It looked like the people took pride in making a community. In the row at the back of the cul-de-sac was an empty lavender home with simple for rent sign out front. I spoke to the realtor in town, and everything was taken care of. Luckily, the owners left some basic furniture, so I didn't have to worry about anything too big. I flew back home, packed up my important stuff, and drove across the country with Cal buckled into the passenger seat. Of course, I had to stop and rest for a couple of nights on the way, let Cal out of his carrier, and stretch in a hotel room for the night. I timed our arrival for late morning, so I would have a large part of the day to unpack and not disturb my new neighbors by getting there too early. Several people stopped by to welcome me as I was going back and forth in the car. An older woman with blue hair and eccentric dress introduced herself as Ms. Jules, said they had a welcoming committee. She was one that started it as she lived here most of her life. The neighborhood had a couple of rules, but nothing too bad or anything like an HOA. They would be by around dinner time, when you really should be taking a break anyway. She told me. She was nice. I told her I would be ready, and she said she hoped Cal would come out to see her. I smiled. I spent the next couple of hours getting everything out of the car, so I could let Cal into the rest of the house to explore, and I could get a shower before the welcoming committee showed up, around 5:30. There was a knock at my door, and I saw Ms. Jules with a couple of other people. I welcomed them in. Ms. Jules introduced me to Dave Hancock, the middle-aged neighbor directly beside me, and Kayla, a woman around my age who lived in the row of houses to my right. Ms. Jules had brought some sandwiches and bags of assorted chips. We sat around my table where I had managed to clear most of my stuff off. She commented that I had done well for one day of work. We sat around eating and making small talk. Kayla seemed shy but told me she would be happy to show me around town if I wanted to stay. I'm sure I'll take you up on that, but what do you mean if I want to stay? Kayla nervously looked at Ms. Jules. She smiled warmly at me. We may as well get to the neighborhood rules. It's really not much to worry about. Can I have that paperwork, please? Dave opened a folder with some papers in it. There was a town map, a small pamphlet about the community center, and a printed list about our little street. Ms. Jules pushed them toward me. You can read those at your leisure, but I do need to go over some things with you tonight. Oh, okay, no problem. I stammered a little. The street cleaner comes once a month. In the afternoon, on the first Tuesday of the month. You want any cars in the driveway or to be out at that time. I'm sure you saw the board in the middle by the bench. You can find information about town events, people trying to rehome some things, or even some snacks for people to take. We all vote at the community center when it's that time of year. This is all written down for you. You can come to any of us here if you have questions or need anything. But now you know where the three of us live. Thank you. I'll be sure to leave some cookies out for everyone once I'm settled in. I didn't say more. It felt like she wasn't done going over things. There was a bit of tension in the air. Cal cautiously peeked around the corner to see what was going on. Hello, dear. How do you like your new home? She held her hand down to him. He slowly approached and sniffed her for a minute before rubbing against her hand. He must smell Emily. She's my tortoise. Cute, I smiled. I'd like to meet her sometime. Absolutely. She paused before continuing. This is an old town. Not much has changed in a long time. It's had slow growth, and many natural areas have been maintained for centuries. The trees behind our street are the edge of the state park. Wow, that's awesome. Kayla, I'd explore with you sometime if that's something you like too. I'd love to. Kayla responded. I don't have a hiking buddy. Before I could say more, Ms. Jules continued. I'll finish up so you can get some rest tonight. There's just one more rule we all follow here. Her face looked older than it had a minute ago, makeup crowding in the gentle creases of her face. She looked into my eyes. Don't look outside if you hear any noises at night. It's not all night, just between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Don't go out at that time. If you do get caught out at that time, there's Ashley Street just down the main road. You saw that, right? Parked there for the night. Many of us have had to sit in our cars for a couple of hours over the years. This is a small enough town that neighborhood knows it's just us and won't get worried by a car there early in the morning. I didn't know what to think. My mind tried to come up with a logical reason. Do animals come in from the park? Something does, she said quietly. It's been at least as long as I have. As long as you don't look out, there's nothing to worry about. And don't worry about Cal, he'll be fine. I keep Emily inside just to be safe. It's not every night, but you're better off just not looking out at that time at all. I know this is a lot to take in, but please just listen to it. Any of our community would talk if you have any questions. We'll leave you be for night. I'll check in soon. With that, she stood up from the table and the others followed. Kayla waved goodbye. Ms. Jules' blue hair shone under the streetlight until she made it to her door. Dave stood around another moment as we watched them go. I know that all sounds pretty weird. The people that lived here before couldn't handle it and they left. My phone number is with the paperwork if you need anything. Or if you really need something overnight, just bang on the wall and I'll hear. I'll be over at 301. Good night. Thank you, good night. I headed back inside, head pounding. I sat heavily on the couch and tried to absorb what I had just heard. Ms. Jules looked serious, and she had been so nice. I felt bad doubting her. What was the harm in listening to her? I was normally sleeping at that time anyway, and she said Cal was safe. If they all were, being honest, I didn't want to find out. I would just stay inside and not go looking. Cal decided he was ready for bed, and I followed. It had been a long day. I fell asleep hard and didn't wake up until sunlight was streaming through my window. Cal crying to be fed. I dragged myself out of bed as my thoughts drifted to the previous night. Maybe there was nothing. I hadn't woken up at all, and Cal was acting normally. He was fine anywhere as long as he was getting food. I got him fed and looked out my front window. Ms. Jules was sitting on the bench, glancing back at my house. I got dressed and headed out to see her. Oh, good. How was your first night? She stood up and took my hand. Slept like a log. I didn't wake up until Cal demanded breakfast. She nodded. I'm sorry I had to spring that on you last night, but it really has to be done right way. A few people started their mornings, smiling or nodding to us. They all looked a little relieved. So, it really is true then? I'll be honest. I was half thinking I dreamt that. Unfortunately, yes. It's how I lost my husband and our son. I didn't want to scare you too much last night. I don't have to tell you the details. I stared blankly for a few seconds. I'm so sorry. It's okay, honey. It's been a long time. It's just a little bit easier than it used to be. I know they wouldn't want to spend every day sad over them. Can I ask what happened? What happens if you look? I asked, wincing a little and hoping I didn't sound too insensitive. Are you sure? I thought another moment. I would rather know than let the curiosity get to me. She sat back down. We had heard the rules when we moved in together right out of school, my husband Charles and me. People had doubts about us, but we were meant to be from the day we met. When our son Joe was born, we decided we would lock him in his room for the night. We gave him the one without windows to be safe. Joe was getting a little older, and we hadn't locked his room at night anymore. I guess one day he got curious or didn't believe us. We heard a scream and ran to his room. Joe wasn't there. Before I could react, Charles pushed me in and locked the door. I heard him run out, and then just silence. The neighbors saw what happened in the morning and rushed to the house. They found me locked inside. There was really nothing left of them. Chunks strewn across the lawn, everywhere. Blood soaked into the grass. They were buried together, just pieces. There was no way to tell who was who. That's all any of us know. Holy shit, I whispered. I could feel the bile heating up my stomach, threatening to come up my throat. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say. I'll never get the sight out of my mind. So I try hard to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. You really will be okay if you don't look. I should go tend to my Emily. I walked her home and gave her a hug. I went back inside and collapsed against the door. Cal came to see what was wrong, and I scooped him up and cried. What the fuck? How was this real? I told myself again that was the middle of the night. To stay asleep, stay in bed. My house was perfect. My neighbors were lovely. Just don't look for any sounds at night. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, listlessly organizing my belongings. Cal screamed at me, and I just about jumped out of my skin. He just wanted dinner. Heart pounding and hands shaking. I got him taken care of to stop his yelling. I sat at the table and slid the bottle of whiskey over towards me, just as I was going to take a swig out of the bottle. There was a knock at the door. I was tired but got up to check. There was a swath of black hair. It was Kayla. Hi. Ms. Jewell said she talked to you. I wanted to see how you were holding up. She smiled weakly at me. I stood to the side. Do you want to come in? I was just going to have a drink. She stepped. Thanks. Now that I had company, I grabbed 2 glasses and a couple cans of Coke. I guess you would have heard her story too. How long have you lived here? I inquired. Yeah, just a bit over a year. Have you seen anything? No, I've never dared look. No one else has looked since I've been here. The people who lived here before finally heard the noises and they left. She was pregnant. I think that's a big reason they didn't want to stay. So you have heard things? Not a lot. I started sleeping with earbuds pretty quickly. I didn't need to hear more. I looked at her, hoping she would go on but didn't want to pressure her. She continued. The first time I just heard something walking around. It was quiet, but I could hear it rustling leaves as it went. I told myself it had just been an animal. We do live against the woods. A couple nights later, I heard it walking again. I had blinds drawn, but I still didn't even want to look in that direction. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. The movement stopped. I heard the faintest scratch, then knocking on the window, like someone tapping with just a fingernail. I found some faint footprints in the morning. She paused to take a drink. They were bigger than I expected. They almost looked like a deer mixed with a human. Almost like there was a heel, but then they turned cloven. I moved my bed upstairs that day and started sleeping with the earbuds at night. It helps. I really recommend it. Thanks for the drink, she said, finishing it. I should go get settled for the night. And let me know when you've had time to unpack, and we can do some hiking during the day. Of course. And thanks for the tip. The next couple weeks, I continued to put everything in their new places and started my new job. I was getting the hang of it. Things started to feel a little normal. Kayla and I had started hiking on Saturday or Sunday mornings, still well after the sun had risen. I hadn't heard anything at night. I never forgot to close the blinds, but I did start to forget about the noises. Nearly a month after I moved in, I heard walking through the neighborhood. I had seen deer a couple times, coming around dusk to drink at a couple bird baths around the street. They were back. That's all it was. Still, I was glad I listened to Kayla's story and put my bedroom on the second floor. I about shit myself when I heard the tapping on my window. I whisper called for Cal. He sat up from the end of the bed. My heart sank into my stomach. The tapping continued. I reached for my phone. It was after 2:45. This should be over soon. I didn't want to disturb him, but I felt like I had to talk to someone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to retype the message about 4 times. Hi, Dave. Sorry to bother you so early. I just can't sleep. I jumped as the tapping started to get more aggressive. My phone went off. It's no problem. Don't worry. It'll be over soon. Just a few minutes, and then it's over for the night. It's never gotten in. Just don't look. Let me know if you need me to come over after or tomorrow. 2:55, so close. Okay, 5 minutes. I can do that. Thank you. I think I'll get shades. The blinds aren't good enough. Dave, that's a good idea. Tell Cal hi for me. I sat for another couple minutes, and then the tapping stopped all at once. There was no rustling of something moving away, just silence. I pulled a slightly disgruntled Cal up closer to me, anxiety through the roof. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Dave caught me in the morning. You did well. That was worse than it normally is. I could hear it from mine. Let me know if you need help with the blinds. He waved and was on his way before I could respond. He liked talking about these things even less than the others. Couldn't blame him. I stopped to get blinds after work and didn't forget to put my earbuds in again. Things continued as they had. Work, hike, play with Cal. I was making enough at my new job to be fine, but I had spent most of my savings to suddenly move. I stopped at the local bar and started taking some shifts Friday nights, Saturdays, or Sundays. This was a smaller town, so even with a later shift, I still had about half an hour by the time I got home to get inside safely. I was busy and tired, but it would be worth it. I would feel better having savings again. But I was just getting so tired. Finally, last Friday night, I was exhausted. That type of bone tired that sinks into your bones, so drained that a minor inconvenience could make you start crying. I worked every day for 3 weeks. I got home after my bar shift, 12:35. All I had to do was drag my tired butt in the house and pass out for the night. The next thing I remember is how uncomfortable I felt. My eyes snapped open. Fuck, I fell asleep. How long had it been? I had only just got home, right? I was in my own driveway, with plenty of time to get in. I looked at my phone, 2:24. Fuck me. I heard something right by me. Before I could stop myself, I was looking over. All I saw were fingertips, just barely placed onto my driver's side window. The rest of the hand was obscured by the door. Then there was movement. What seemed to be branches started to move. They were turning towards my car, one gnarled point making contact with my window and scraping along it. I slammed my eyes shut. One hand desperately pulled my hood over my head, and the other covered my mouth. Will my breathing get under control and not have a full-blown panic attack right now? I hadn't really seen anything, right? It didn't see me look. All I saw was fingertips. It could have been a normal person who got lost and ended up here. After all, the noises didn't come every night. Those weren't antlers. It was a trick of the darkness. Then what made the shrill scraping coming from right outside? And those were fingertips, but they were too long and rough, worn and cracked and dirty. I curled in my seat, trying not to scream, eyes squeezed shut. Antlers like bark, but hard enough to damage the metal burned into my mind. A slap, I bit into my lip hard enough to bleed, but didn't scream. It sounded like a hand slamming into my door, beside the other fingertips. I could hear heavy breathing. My chest ached. It felt like my heart would give out before anything else had a chance to happen. My stomach lurched as my car rocked hard. Tears and snot soaked my hoodie. Another slam on the car, and it rocked again. It felt like if it hit any harder, the glass would break. What were the rules here? Could it get in? It really seemed to be trying. A different slam echoed through my bones. The sixth sound was like a head against glass, antlers scratching on the metal frame above. It slammed its head again. There was nothing I could do. Again, it wasn't in yet, and I figured my best bet was to stay down and keep my eyes shut. Again, the car rocked, gentler this time, and the slamming stopped. I couldn't open my eyes. I didn't think it was long enough. It couldn't be 3 o'clock yet, but it was so hard to tell. Minutes felt like hours, time dripping by like cold molasses. How long had it stopped to staring at my before its assault? I could hear it walking around, pacing around the car. It started to fade out. Then I heard hooves on pavement. Metal squealed and glass cracked. I screamed. Dead silence. I continued to lay curled on my side. Nothing more came. I heard Ms. Jules calling me and running. I still didn't dare open my eyes. It took a few minutes of convincing, but I finally held my phone up and looked. 3:12. I started uncontrollably sobbing. Fear and relief racked my body, and I laid there shaking badly, stomach in knots. I was eventually able to unlock my door. Ms. Jules ripped it open and held me in her arms. We cried together. That was nearly a month ago. I thought I'd leave that day, but I'm still here. Where else would I go? I have kind, caring neighbors. My home is nice. I talk with Ms. Jules. Dave checks in on me. I hike with Kayla. I hold Cal close. I did quit working at the bar that day. I'll never go out at night again. I sleep with earbuds and a white noise machine. My bedroom windows are shuttered tight from the inside as soon as it starts to get dark. Story 6. Northwood's yurt stay, severed deer parts, eerie sounds, unearthed potion bottles. Almost a year ago, December 2024, my partner and I decided to spend a weekend in a yurt in western central Minnesota near Sandstone for her birthday. We chose this location because a hot tub was included as an amenity. Little did we know it was a clawfoot tub with a campfire beneath. We drove up from Chicago and made our usual small-town grocery run before descending on our spot. The road to the yurt was primitive, winding, not easily located on a map, and remote. As soon as we arrived, we noticed a cabin where the owners usually stayed. They were out at the time, and a couple yurts. We were alone, and the air was cold and dry. We breathed in and out, relishing the solitude away from the noise of the city. At this time, a truck pulls up in the muddy roundabout, slows down, stops for a moment, and quickly pulls away. Not the owners. Since we arrived, we've been hearing shotguns fire in the background and shrugged it off as hunters in the area. This was in Northwoods, after all. We made ourselves at home in the yurt, cracked a couple beers, and decided to explore. We walked towards the cabin and followed a trail to the nearby frozen lake. We noticed something hanging from the trees, and as we approached, we found severed deer parts dangling in the air, legs and torso with bloody cartilage, veins and all. We looked down and saw the deer head staring straight at us, tongue hanging from its mouth. Sitting atop of which shed looking in the direction of our yurt. My partner, a vegetarian and animal lover, looked away horrified. We looked at each other, heard more gunshots, and made some sense of it. Northwoods. We texted the owners. It took them a while to respond. They assured us it was their backwoods neighbors. Every country home is them, I suppose. We felt reassured, but nevertheless a bit uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and isolated. We were still the only folks on the whole property. We returned to the yurt, drank some whiskey, warmed up, and went to bed exhausted. The yurt had no lock, but folks are friendly up here, right? The next day we woke up, felt refreshed and ready to have a birthday hike around the property. We made breakfast and ran out of the stock firewood, back to the old woodshed. As I walked, I saw the deer head in the distance pointed in my direction, awaiting my inevitable return. I grabbed the wood, making an effort not to make eyes with the ill-fated animal, and quickly headed back. An interesting start to the day. We milled about for a bit, and I scrambled down a hillside to the edge of the frozen lake. I came upon a pile of old rusted tins, including a pop-top beer can, a Folgers coffee tin from the 1950s, and various little bottles of different colors. As a person who studied history, these were all archaeological findings to me, and I spent the better part of the afternoon unearthing these things. I tossed them up to our site, and we dusted them off and displayed them on our picnic table. We moved on and down the road to some open public lands. I brought the whiskey with me, and we took turns swigging the bottle. We literally stumbled upon an old car door, what looked like from an old pre-60s white truck, embedded in the ground. I asked my partner to take a photo of me with it, and at that point my phone died for the remainder of the weekend. All of these findings from that afternoon started to appear strange, like someone quickly packed up and left the property for good over 60 years prior. I realized perhaps I was meddling with some bad juju and moved on. That feeling lasted on the walk back to camp. Our night proceeded as usual. The wind was picking up and the cold was blowing hard. We made a hot fire that lasted until we fell fast asleep. I woke up freezing. The fire died and the potbelly stove needed to be filled and stoked back to life. But it wasn't the cold that woke me. It sounded like something was encircling us, moving in closer and closer. I woke up my partner and she asked, "Is there another guest looking for their yurt?" It had to be 3 or 4 in the morning. My phone dead, so I didn't know. Along came more noises. It sounded like a 3-gallon bucket just rolling and rolling, whirring louder and louder. This made some sense since we had used a bucket to fill the hot tub earlier, but it was incessant and grew louder along with the footsteps. It made no sense because the clearing in the woods couldn't have been more than 15 feet wide by 30 feet long, and a bucket couldn't roll that freely. Unexplainable. We stuck a broomstick in the door handle to keep the door locked and kept our hatchet next to the bed. My eyes were wide for what felt like forever. I must have managed to fall asleep at some point because I woke up to daylight and I never felt so relieved. I looked outside and there was a 3-gallon bucket sitting upright where we had left it. Nothing touched or moved from the night before. These were some of the creepiest woods I have encountered. There's something about that part of the country in the cold dead of winter that makes you feel a little alone and empty, but like someone or something is always watching. I left the archaeological findings behind, naturally. Story 7. While renovating my house, I uncovered a crawl space. The journal inside had entries about me. I've only been living here for a month. It's not much, but I got the place for a good price. Definitely a fixer-upper. It's in a good, quiet neighborhood. So to me, it was a no-brainer. I'm pretty handy and know my way around a set of tools. So I figure I could do most of the physical work that needed to be done. Some carpet and drywall. Replacing was the first thing on my list. It's a fairly small house, so I knew I would be able to do most of it on my own. The first week was fine, ripped up the living room carpet and threw on a fresh coat of paint. The days were long, but the work was definitely paying off. I'd do most of the self-renovations when I got home from work. So by the time I finished each day, my bed was calling my name. Every night when I laid down to sleep, I would hear a light scratching noise. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall of my bedroom, which only meant one thing. I definitely had rodents. The house was old, and the people that lived here before me did a horrible job with keeping up the maintenance. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I can do. Funds were already tight as it is, and I couldn't afford an exterminator at the moment. At first, I tried to ignore it, and just told myself I would get to it when I could. The next few nights were very similar. Day job, renovations, sleep after a monotonous week of hard work. Something strange happened. The light scratching I'd grown so used to hearing suddenly stopped. At first, I didn't notice. But that night, as I lay in bed, I realized the house was completely silent. I held my breath, waiting, nothing. For the first time in weeks, I relaxed. Silence. Pure, beautiful silence. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard it again. Not from my bedroom, though. From the guest bedroom across the hall. Just when I thought maybe I lucked out, I was brought back to the harsh reality that is owning a house. I took off of work the next day to finish some more project around the house. There was just a few more major things that had to be taken care of. After working most of the day, I grabbed myself a bite to eat and called my buddy Mike. I've been so damn busy with the house. It's been hard to keep up with social life. Mike was a handyman himself. So any questions I had regarding the house, I knew I could run by him. Dude, how's the house coming along? Mike asked, honestly, looking better each day. It's just extremely time consuming. Oh, and by the way, is it normal to feel like I'm just bleeding money? Ah, yes. Welcome to the sweet world of home ownership, he said with a laugh. Quick question. Have you ever dealt with mice around your house? I swear I'm hearing them in the walls. No, man, that's ghosts. You have ghosts. Yeah, well, maybe they can get rid of the mice. We talked for a bit longer before he let me get back to the last of my home improvement. The last project I had to tackle was the guest room. I had to rip the carpet up and take down some horrible wallpaper. I was just about to walk into the guest room when I noticed my bedroom door was cracked open. I know for sure that I closed it. It became a force of habit since I was a teenager. Whenever I left my room, I closed the door behind me. I thought maybe my exhaustion was catching up to me. I could not wait to finish this damn house. The carpet came up with no problem. The wallpaper was a different story. That took me forever. The last of the wallpaper was in the closet. I was just about halfway through removing the wallpaper from the closet when I came across the crawl space. It had been completely covered, and when I saw it, I admit I was taken by surprise. I used my phone flashlight to peer inside, and that's when I saw it. The mice droppings. I knew it. I knew something was crawling around back there. I was relieved I wasn't going crazy. Just as I was about to close it back up, I noticed something in the far corner. Pillows and a blanket. Old and dusty. Remnants of the past, no doubt. There was something else, though. A book. Some sort of journal. It was covered with dust, and the pages were withered. This thing had been in here for a while. I read the first entry. Entry 1. I'm always alone. Nobody ever sees how I'm doing. I love them. Why don't they notice me? I flipped through a few more entries, each written in that same messy handwriting. Entry 3. Sometimes I hear them moving around upstairs. I wish I could be there with them. I miss being part of things. Entry 5. I saw them leave this morning. The house gets so quiet when they're gone. Entry 6. I like this little hideout. It's like I can escape reality. Leave all my troubles on the other side of this wall. I couldn't tell if the person was lonely, delusional, or just writing some kind of creepy story. The entries were strange, but not outright threatening. Still, something about that line. The house gets so quiet when they're gone. Strange. I set the journal down and grabbed my phone. Yo, Mike answered. Don't tell me you found the ghosts. Not quite. But get this, I said, holding back a laugh. I was ripping down wallpaper in the guest closet, right? Found a little crawl space. Mice droppings, nasty as hell. But also this old-ass journal. Journal? Yeah, listen to this. The house gets so quiet when they're gone. I said in my best spooky narrator voice. Mike cracked up. Bro, what kind of psycho used to live there? Who knows? I probably just uncovered the tragic backstory of some weirdo shut in. Maybe they got locked in and never made it out. Better stop reading that thing out loud at night. That's how all the horror movies start. Please. The only thing haunting me right now is the cost of drywall. We both laughed for a while before hanging up. But even after I put the phone down, I caught myself glancing at that open crawl space again. The journal was still sitting there in the beam of my flashlight, half open, like it was waiting for me to read the next page. My house was finally finished. Well, it was finished enough for me. I needed to relieve some stress, and I figured there was no better way than to have a little housewarming party. I invited a few friends just for some food, drinks, and laughs. While waiting for food to be delivered, Mike had the best idea. Go ahead and get that journal, man. Read us some bedtime stories. He said over the laughter. There were some confused looks from my other friends, not knowing what he was referring to. Yeah, he found it in an old crawl space. Thing looks prehistoric. After some sarcastic cheering and egging on, I decided to appease the crowd. I cleared my throat and flipped to a random page. Entry 47. I've been here for a while now. I like what they've done to my place. It feels like home finally. Amazing work, keep going. Someone said in a patronizing tone. I continued further. Entry 62. They're finally leaving. I did my part to make sure they knew it was time to go. Got all to myself. All right, one more for the night. I said. I turned toward the end of the journal. Entry 89. He is changing everything. This is MY House. Patching holes and ripping up carpet. Bullshit. These are MY memories he is painting over. He leave a lot. That gives me a lot of time to plan. He needs to know this house belongs to me. This was unsettling. This felt wrong. I felt a lump in my throat. I glanced over at Mike just as I finished the last words. He was sitting there with his goofy smile. Aha, very funny, you asshole, trying to spook me. He must have snuck a personal entry in there when he was helping me set up the party. This guy was never serious. We kind of laughed it off and continued on with the night. The food was great. The drinks were even better. My last few friends there said goodbye, and it was time for me to get some much-needed sleep. After cleaning up a bit, I crawled into bed. It didn't take long for me to fall asleep. I thought I was dreaming when I heard it. A knock. I wasn't sure if it was coming from the walls. Then I heard it again. A door. I knew it was a door. My door? I got up to check what the hell was going on. And then again I heard it. That was not from my door. The guest room. It was coming from the guest room. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. I swung the guest room door open. I stood still trying to hear something. The house was quiet. I could only hear my own heavy breathing. Another knock. It was coming from the closet. Did I leave the crawl space door open? Did I leave a window open? Was a draft coming through? All thoughts that ran through my head in the half a second since I heard the knocking. I took another step forward. The floorboards groaning under my feet. The closet door stood slightly open, and I could see the edge of that crawl space panel inside. I reached out a hand to push the door fully open, feeling a little ridiculous as I whispered, "Hello?" into the dark. In the same heartbeat, the door exploded open. A figure burst out of the closet, a shadow lunging at me with a flash of steel in their hand. Before I could even shout, a knife slashed through the air, grazing my arm and sending a jolt of pain through me. Adrenaline took over. I stumbled back, trying to put distance between us, but the attacker was on me in a heartbeat. I barely registered the pain as I twisted away and bolted for the window. My only thought was escape. I jumped and hurled myself through it, crashing onto the ground outside. Pain shot up my leg as I landed hard, but I didn't stop. I limped as fast as I could toward my neighbor's house, my heart pounding louder than ever. That's where I called the cops, breathless, bleeding, and finally forced to admit that something far worse than mice had been living in my walls. In the end, the police found the crawl space exactly as I'd left it, except for the journal lying open to that final entry. There was no sign of the attacker, and no explanation of how they'd been living there unnoticed. But I knew what I'd seen. The journal's final words were burned into my mind. This house will always be mine. I moved out the next week. Whatever haunted that house, whoever had claimed it as their own, I wasn't sticking around to find out what happened next. Story 8. My friend in the elephant mask. Would it make a good cereal bowl? It may be too shallow for a cereal bowl. An ashtray or a cat bowl would be better. Johnson, you copy? The voice came muffled from the other side of the door. Copy, Bradley. Johnson's static voice came prelude by the trill of a walkie-talkie. I've got a crisp 50 saying this is nothing. The officer on the other side of the door said, Did you find a freezer? Yeah, it's right here. I'm not betting shit. You probably opened it already. You think I'd do that? I got my ass out of bed for this. I want to at least make it interesting. Officer Bradley said. The guy seemed pretty worried when he called in. All right, screw it. 50 if it's anything. Anything at all. All right, I'm getting a good breakfast. Opening in 3, 2, 1 inch the seal of the freezer, door peeled from the door frame. Officer Bradley was a silhouette behind the blinding beam of his flashlight. I couldn't make out the details of his face, but I could imagine. What's it gonna be? Johnson asked over the radio. Bradley said nothing. His light started to shake. Come on, who's getting rich? Bradley. Johnson's concern quivered through his joke. Bradley didn't answer the question, but he replied in a quiet voice. I think they're alive. August 2015. Golden sweet corn rained onto my tray with a salty butter shine. Green beans dipped into their shallow pool of chicken broth, garlic, diced onion, and bacon. The beans made their presence known with a mouth-watering steam. A mound of potatoes plopped onto the tray and was pressed into a caldera with the back end of the cooked spoon. The divot was filled till it overflowed with a heavenly brown gravy. Last came the pork. A pork with the tenderness of a pudding and the taste of Hawaiian-basted honey. Each cut of meat was so fresh, it caused rumors that the meat was butchered in the kitchen. I believed them too. Lunch was the best part of St. Jude Catholic School. Unfortunately, it was followed by the worst. Once our bellies were stuffed to the brim, we were banished to the schoolyard for recess. Fresh-cut grass poisoned the air. Summer still burned at the beginning of the school year, and the sun blasted a bright sting to the back of my eyes. The day wasn't made for me. My days were when it rained, and we could go to the library to enjoy the silence while the talking boys released their energy into gym. But days like this were ruled by the talking boys. They squealed and screeched as kickballs and wiffle balls torpedoed through the air. The other girls that weren't interested in joining the boys usually huddled by the school building telling jokes and updating each other on the latest gossip. I would listen with my back to them. Whenever I heard something especially juicy, I would sign my response close to my chest, so they didn't see. I wished I could turn and share all the gossip I overheard, the benefits of not being noticed. I knew Darren found his dad's booze and planned to bring a bottle to school that week. I knew Bianca got into it with her mom the night before because she was failing math. I imagined they would get a kick out of that. Maybe they'd even be my friend if they understood me, but they wouldn't. No one would. The schoolyard became unusually quiet. A group of boys huddled at the fence that separated us from the woods. What they saw captured their attention and sewed their mouths shut, at least until they scurried away to giggle in small groups. Not all of them were so amused with the subject beyond the fence. Most looked confused, but some even looked concerned. Piece by piece, the huddle of children broke back into their daily play until I could get a peek at what was they were so interested in. On the other side of the fence, crouched beneath the shadows of the woods, was a boy. He looked each boy in the eye when he asked them to play. It felt like a plea, a desperate attempt to find a friend. The boys didn't care, though. How could they? The boy in the woods spoke in a tongue they didn't understand. Like me, he spoke with no tongue at all. It was a lonely way to speak in this school. Alone was a hard place to be in 8th grade. After seeing him, I felt we could be there together. When the last boy peeled away, I walked the fence. With each step, I felt more emboldened, more hopeful to finally have a friend. I can't talk to you. I need normal friends. The words echoed from moments I had the same urge and past. But this time had to be different. He was like me. He would understand me. Aren't you contagious, Holly? I shook my head and tried to keep the past away like a swarm of bees, but they kept stinging. What are you doing with your hands, weirdo? Go away. People will think I'm weird too if you're next to me. Did God make you broken on purpose? I was stuck halfway to the fence. All the sounds of the schoolyard vanished behind the words. This was a stupid idea. No one wanted to be my friend. Why did I even walk this far? What a waste. I turned around to go back and pretend I was like the other girls. I wanted to smile when they smiled and laugh when they laughed without the embarrassment of having them see me. But my mom's voice cut through the swarm. She's just shy. I knew she wasn't our supervisor that day. The girls wouldn't have talked quite as loud, and the boys wouldn't have played quite as hard if she was. Chipper, as the other kids called her in whispers, held the reputation of a drill sergeant when she wore the habit. The type of nun to crack a ruler across your knuckles if you misbehaved during her prime years. Though, the main reason she earned the brand Chipper was a small chip missing from her front tooth. She's just shy. Her voice replayed in my head. Her catchphrase when anyone asked about me. Why doesn't she talk? She's just shy. What happened to her? She's just shy. It was a simpler explanation than the truth. A less shameful statement than the truth. I was born like this, but I'm not shy, or at least I refuse to be. I closed my eyes and took a first step towards a boy. The yard got a little quieter as the other kids vacated the area around the boy in the woods. When I felt the beating sun disappear behind the shade of the trees, I stopped and waited for a moment. I'm not shy, I thought to myself, but before I had the courage to open my eyes, the fence rattled. The clatter of the chain-link fence stopped with the stomp of feet meeting the ground. Step by step, he came closer until I heard his heavy, phlegm-rattled breath just in front of me. With one final reassurance, I opened my eyes. Immediately, I knew why the other kids avoided him. He was big, much bigger than the other boys in our grade. Most of the boys were just sprouting the first seedlings of hair on their forearm, while his forearms were already coated. A leather canteen dangled from his belt. His chest and shoulders stood at my eye level and were noticeably broad even under his tattered gray jacket. Hair even started to sprout on his neck, just below his white mask, a detail I hadn't noticed across the yard. An elephant mask made cheap and pressed his face with a single elastic string that ran in an eroded divot around his head before it vanished into the cave of his gray jacket's hood. In the center where the trunk should be was only a hole. The jagged edges of the plastic hole encircled a void too deep to see any detail of his face through. My breath stuttered. This person could hurt me or take me, or do anything else he wanted, and I would be helpless. I could scream at the top of my lungs for help, but only a strained whine from my over-tightened vocal cords would escape. No one would hear that. Hell, I wasn't even sure he would hear it. I knew my only option was to run, but when I took a glance behind me to plan my escape, he raised his hand. He exposed the dry, callous skin of his palm to me. It stayed suspended in the air for a moment before he slowly brought the tips of his fingers towards me. Gently, they landed on my throat. Each of his 5 fingerprints carefully scraped up and down. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't get my hands to move. I tried to get something to escape my mouth, but I only felt my throat strain under his touch. Finally, he removed his hand and signed a single word, a word that I hadn't heard anyone say to me, a word that turned off all the alarms blaring in my head. Beautiful. He signed, October 2023. The pond was no wider than 12 feet and smelled like frankincense and sweet licorice. Grass around the pond grew high and hid something on the other side of the water. Between tufts of grass, a smoky gray shape laid still on the ground. I thought it was a discarded fur coat until I noticed its 2 beady eyes fixated on me from its white, cone-shaped head. "What is that, Holly?" Abigail asked. I loved the sound of her voice, the way it stumbled from one note to the next without guidance. She only used it when we were alone, so I knew her brother already ventured beyond earshot. Still, it was conflicting. While I loved our secret, it was too wonderful to not be shared, something she stiffly refused to do. I think it is an opossum. I signed, "Geez, do you think it's sick? Should we help it?" Abigail asked. Her hands anxiously scratched at her jeans. "Maybe it is just playing dead?" I signed. As if on cue, a crow landed just behind the opossum's head and disappeared behind the grass. When the crow's head resurfaced, it did with a string of red, slick entrails. It clapped its beak around the guts until it cut a bite out and let the rest flop back to ground. Abigail's lip turned in a shocked disgust. Method. I signed. Abigail gave me a jab from her elbow and a laugh. The most wonderful secret of all. Holly, you too are supposed to stay close. Get Abigail and follow the sound. Abigail's older brother Lucas called before a metallic rattle screeched through the air. He was about 23, 2 years older than Abigail and I. He wouldn't get any older if he kept up the racket. Abigail watched the annoyance on my face and waited for me to relay the message. Your brother is being an idiot. I signed to her before I held her hand. We rushed through the woods to Lucas. As we ran, I kept thinking about the opossum. Even after the crow ripped at its entrails, I swore it blinked. When we emerged from the woods, Lucas had the chain link fence clutched in both his fists and was shaking it rapidly. He only stopped when I hit him with a swift slap to the shoulder. Hey, what the hell? He said. You know this is illegal, right? Are you trying to get caught? I signed. He glanced at Abigail briefly, who was focused on our lips. By who? No one is here. Are the birds going to rat us out? Or maybe the squirrels? He said and signed. For the first time in years, I looked beyond the chain link fence. Across the overgrown schoolyard was a husk that was once called St. Jude Catholic School. As a kid, I always thought the school was shaped like a stale, square bagel. A barren courtyard of a hole was encircled by the depressing corridors and classrooms. It was divided into 4 sections, each with their own special landmarks. The south side had the main entrance. The east section had the cafeteria and library. The west section had the pool and gymnasium in the north. The section we were facing had the theater. A tiny access door peeked over the edge of the theater's roof like a timid child. After the incident, the school tried to reassure the parents by hefty investments in security. All glass was reinforced and every window was fortified with steel bars. But it was too little too late. The parents and their precious tuition money already migrated with their kids to the rival Catholic school upstate. St. Jude was left to succumb to the vines and weather. The corpse looked more like an abandoned prison than a school. Or maybe the rats will. Lucas whispered. The thought made my spine wriggle. I hope whatever you're looking for is worth it. Lucas said as he stomped a path for us through the waist-high grass. We walked around the school building to get to the entrance. At the entrance was a figure. It sat against the front door, cloaked in a gray jacket. I felt every muscle in my body constrict at once. Abigail turned to ask what was wrong, and all I could do was gesture toward the figure. She immediately tapped Lucas on the shoulder to point his attention towards the mysterious man. The figure eased itself to its feet when it saw us. It waved, a wild wave with arms flapping like the tube men at car dealerships. Then he dropped his hood. To my relief, there was no mask, only a face, a boyish face, a face I had never seen before, and judging by the look on Abigail's, she hadn't either. Lucas turned to us when I rolled and motioned us to the boy. He couldn't have been older than 16. His brunette hair waved chaotically at the top of his beanpole body. His skin was still plagued with the red specks of puberty, and atop his lip was his most prized possession, a crown of 10 scraggly hairs. Lucas, ladies, he said with all the charm a boy drowning in supermarket cologne could muster. Abigail took the hearing aids from her ears and stowed them away in her pocket. They don't even help that much, she would say if I asked why. But I knew that wasn't true. I stopped asking and just assured her with a touch on the back. Stevie, where's your brother? Lucas shot at the kid. He got called into work tonight. But don't worry. I'll get us through safe. I'm like the outdoor boys of buildings. Stevie said, I don't see the gear. Your brother was supposed to bring the gear. Lucas asked, who needs it anyway? It can't be that hard. Stevie proclaimed. Lucas pinched the exhaustion to his brow. You have your license? Lucas asked, I got it a couple months ago. Thank you for asking. Then drive home. Lucas said. He put his shoulder to the door. I can't dash. Lucas heaved the metal door open with a creak, followed by the clatter of aluminum cans on the concrete stoop. I've been drinking. Stevie finished. The smell of stagnant, musty water filled the building. Puddles spotted the tile floor and grew with a rhythmic drip. The entryway ran perpendicular to the south section hallway. At their intersection was a trophy case with only smashed glass to show. The last couple of weeks before the school closed were a blur. Teachers at first tried to maintain the illusion of safety, but as the halls grew more and more empty, they gave up the act. Everyone was scared except for me. I just went through the motions, a passenger in my own body. As I re-entered the remains of the school, I could only wonder if it really was worth it. Where had I even had it last? Maybe my locker? It was as good a place to check first as any. I just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I wasn't a passenger anymore. I felt the fear. What are you thinking? Abigail signed to me as we walked down the hallway. She always seemed to know the answer. She read plain as day on my face. Still, she wanted to know what I would say. It is just like I remember. I signed to her with a smile. As we passed locker after locker, I noticed that each one had a dent. A softball-sized dent near the latch that left them ajar by the thinnest crack. The further we went, the more I noticed a splotch or a smear of brown stained blood in the dents. When we turned the corner to the east section, when I heard a rattle come from behind us, I snapped my head around to see nothing besides the damp floor tiles and busted lockers we'd passed since we turned the corner. Right, ladies? Stevie shouted before he spun around to look at us while he walked backwards. To that moment, I almost forgot he and Lucas were blubbering to each other ahead of us. He waited for a response while the alcohol that sloshed around in his pinky-thin body made him forget his land legs. Had they heard the rattle too? Did he say something? Abigail signed to me. Stevie was zapped into a panic. He blocked his mouth from our sight. Dude, you can't bring deaf people. They're gonna get hurt. What the hell is wrong with you? He said to Lucas, who jabbed him in the ribs with his elbow. Holly's mute, you dipshit. She can hear you. Stevie gathered his wind in a breath before giving a silent, bewildered chuckle to himself. He lagged behind Lucas to get out of his sight. He then raised his hand and mimed like he held something pointed directly at me. Then he popped his thumb down like he pressed a mute button on a TV remote. He winked and turned to catch up to Lucas. She's just shy. My mother's voice echoed again. After the incident, I learned not to argue with it. Abigail tugged on my shirt sleeve and pointed to the locker beside us. It ends. She signed, like the others before it. It was dented and stained in blood, but each locker beyond it was strangely left untouched. Even stranger, this locker was mine. I opened it. Did you find what you're looking for? Lucas asked, but all that was in my locker were chilling words smeared in blood on the back wall that read, "You promised." I sprinted as fast as I could back the way we came. I cut around the corner, flew through the lobby and smashed my weight against the push bar on the door, but it didn't budge. The doors were locked. A metal chain knotted around the door, sealed shut with a padlock. May 2016. Shelley was behind by the length of a grass blade, and the finish line twig was only a couple inches away. It was still anyone's race. Rain washed the schoolyard that morning. The smell of potting soil leaked from the bags stacked between the garden shed and the schoolyard fence. A colony of snails slid on the bags, ready to be drafted into the snail race. Mine was always named Shelley, as it always was. I thought of it like the lead in a Broadway play, though they're each their own actress. They all want to be Shelley. Trunkless didn't give names to his snails. He never gave me his name either. So in my mind, he became Trunkless for the hole in his elephant mask. It was fitting enough. Trunkless never gave his snails a name either. Instead, he gave them a crack. When he found a snail he liked for the day, he popped a slit into the shell with his thumbnail. It was as casual to him as shaking a hand. The ease with which he split their shells made me nauseous. When we first started racing snails, I asked him why he did it, but the answer was simple. Like the hole in his elephant mask and splits in his knuckles, he just liked them better broken. Like us, after many snail races, we developed a system. We took turns clapping for our snails, usually in two. I would clap twice. He would clap twice. It was a brilliant idea in concept. Chaperones would only hear the continuous claps of one kid, but we never got the timing right in practice. The awkward pause between our claps was hilariously obvious even after a full year trying. We stopped trying to make it convincing, and it became only a silly tradition. while we watched the snails run their foot-long marathon. I often got more consumed in the rhythm than the race itself. Look, he signed. I came up with the idea of picking a juicy tomato slice off of my lunch sandwich and stowing it in my pocket to use as motivation beyond the finish line twig. As disappointing as it was to devolve my BLT into a BL, it was proving worth it. Not only were both snails participating, but it was a nail biter. Shelley surged into the lead with only an inch to go. I clapped and waved her forward frantically. He did the same for his snail that started to slip behind, but it was too late. Shelley slipped over the twig to take gold by the thinnest of margins. I jumped up and applauded for the whole yard to hear the peak athleticism on display. I bent down to get a look at the little Olympian as she climbed onto her delicious red prize. Squelch. In an instant, Shelley and the tomato were beneath the stubby heel of a black leather shoe. My mother's shoe. I looked up her habit to see her face. I was shocked to see she didn't seem angry in the slightest. Her cheeks were flush with fear. She snatched me by the arm in a vice grip. Her fingertips dug into my skin deep enough to bruise, but still I tried to fight it. I knew we would be forbidden from going behind the garden shed, with no other place to hide in the open schoolyard. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. That meant no more snail races, no more picking honeysuckles from the bush that grew through the fence, no more friends. I would be back to being an outcast, the quiet kid that no one understood, the broken girl. So I kept fighting, which only made my mom's grip tighter. She blew the whistle around her neck. Everyone get inside now. Get inside. She screamed. I fought until I was pulled back into the school building, and the door slammed shut behind us. The only person that brought me any joy was sealed behind it. The school felt like it was on lockdown for the rest of the day. Nuns monitored the halls between classes, and no one was allowed to use a restroom without an adult escort. When the day came to an end, I laid on the bleachers by the pool. It was an indoor pool attached to the gymnasium by a single set of double doors. The stinging stench of chlorine cleansed my soul after a particularly taxing day. After-school events were canceled that afternoon, so there was no splashing from the swim team or shrill tennis shoe chirps from the gym. It was just me and the soothing hum of the pool jets. I spent most of the time looking up through the sunroof. Clouds, birds, and airplanes eased in and out of glass frame. If I wasn't looking at the sky, I admired the abomination on the wall. A mural, painted with the artistic vision of a blind ape, stained with pearlescent white paint. I assumed it was supposed to be a collage of professional swimmers, but I only thought that because the centermost figure had a vague resemblance to a picture of Michael Phelps I saw once. "What are you still doing here?" A creaky voice called from the doorway to the gymnasium. A janitor with a spindly gray beard and age-spotted scalp hunched over his trach bin on wheels like a walker. He wasn't any of the regular janitors I saw throughout the school day. He must have been part of the evening crew. "What time is it?" I signed, but he kept glaring at me. Of course he didn't understand. I could practically hear the accusations banging around his head. I threw my hands up and walked past him. I heard the squeak of his trash bin trailing behind me through my walk of shame to the main entrance. "I know your face, little girl." He spat as I swung the door open. The front of the school was empty, aside from the occasional bird song. It was silent. It was a sticky heat with the smell of rain starting to roll in. Stepped out and walked around the building to the parking lot. The lot was empty aside from one car. My mother's. Was she waiting on me? The thought of making her wait this long made me dread getting in the car to receive my scolding. As I stepped into the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the schoolyard. It was trunkless with his canteen at his hip. He waved me to come towards him. "I have to show you something." He signed. I was ecstatic. All day, I thought I may never get to see my friend again. Without hesitation, I hopped the fence and went to him. "Where is it?" I signed. "Just behind the garden shed. But you have to promise me something." "Anything." I signed with a smile. "You cannot tell anyone about this." I hesitated. "But promise with a smile." He nodded and popped the cap off of his canteen. Then he led me behind the shed. October 2023. "What the fuck, dude? You all gotta stop fucking with me, man. This isn't funny." Stevie whined. I was in disbelief. We were just there. We opened the door only a few minutes ago, and in that small amount of time, we were chained in. I held the padlock against my palm. It was warm. Someone locked us in. He locked us in. The thought made my head spin as it wrapped around the danger we were in. Abigail's touched my shoulder. Is there another way out of here? She signed. I swallowed the sick feeling when I saw her and kept it down long enough to think. Each of the 3 other sections had at least one exit. The cafeteria and library in the east section each had one. The theater in the north section had one, and the pool and gymnasium in the west section had one each. I stood and turned to the group. Lucas racked his brain for some kind of plan. Stevie paced and swore to God that he'd quit drinking if he got out of there in one piece. I signed to Abigail and Lucas about the other exits. Stevie was desperate to know, but Lucas only told him to follow. We crept back down the hall. Lucas led the pack with Abigail, and I behind him. Each of us kept a careful eye on each door we passed. Stevie stayed behind us as he was told, and kept his mind occupied by tightrope, walking a strip of blue tile on the floor. It wasn't a helpful task, but anything to keep his mouth shut was useful to me. Lucas peeked through the slim glass window on the first classroom door beyond my locker and winced away from it. He looked back at Abigail and I and shook his head. I couldn't resist, though. I cupped my hands over my eyes and looked in. The rat's paw scratched at the tile floor. Not a desperate scratch, but an unfolding and refolding of its paws to a steady rhythm. The tile just seemed to get in the way of its claws. Blood stained the corners of the rat's mouth. Its ear flicked away the horde of flies, convinced of its death, and they should have been right. The rat was severed in half. The open wound spilled the animal's entrails into a hole behind it. All that jutted from the hole was a bear trap's exposed metal teeth in a crimson-stained grin, despite the grisly sight and the unmistakable scent of death oozing from beneath the door. I couldn't look away from Rat's paw, its distress signal. I wanted to put it out of its misery immediately. The suffering was the worst part. I mustered the courage to bury my nose and do it, but just before I turned the doorknob, snap, a piercing scream came from behind me. Stevie's foot was gone. It broke through a brittle blue tile on the floor and sunk its teeth into the boy's shin so deep it could taste the marrow. The iron scent of blood erupted from the hole. Stevie gripped his calf with white knuckles and screamed hard enough to slice his vocal cords to ribbons. But even over the screams, I could hear something. The sound echoed from the school's entrance and ricocheted to me from around the corner. Thick, deliberate footsteps. I dropped to my knees at the hole and tried to pry the trap open. Once I saw a gap in the trap's jaws. My hand slipped in Stevie's blood, and it snapped shut on the wound, sending another scream through his throat. Still, the footsteps got closer, until a figure turned the corner. The white elephant mask with missing trunk was still strapped to his face. He stood as tall as the door frames. His chest was as broad as a truck grill. With the force of a buffalo, he charged directly at us. The same leather canteen swung violently at his hip. I yanked the trap again and again. I didn't care if I had to work the trap's jaws until it chewed Stevie's foot off. He had to get free. We had to get out of there. Abigail tugged at my shirt and screamed with terrified tears streaking down her cheeks. The monster of a man was only a few feet from us when Lucas grabbed my shirt and slung me away from Stevie's leg. By the time I got to my feet, Trunkless was standing right behind the boy. The black-eye slits in the mask aimed right at me. He raised his hand in the air and waved a subtle hello. I was frozen. Everyone, even Stevie, was still for an instant. Trunkless was the first to move. He gently wrapped his hand around the side of Stevie's head and gouged space for his middle finger into his eye socket. Stevie squealed for him to stop, but all the begging did was give him an opening to stuff the mouth of the canteen in. He dumped the liquid down Stevie's throat, then jerked it back out. As Stevie coughed and sputtered, the man wrapped his fingers around Stevie's bottom teeth and strained as he pulled on the mandible. "We have to go." Lucas yanked me out of my paralysis, and we sprinted down the hallway to the muffled pleading of Stevie and dipped into the first doorway that didn't seem like a classroom. But before we could close the door, the shrill screams were abruptly quieted by a pop. I laid sprawled on the floor and ran my hands over the itchy carpet. The scratchy texture was enough to remind me that I could feel that I was breathing. The ceiling above me was tiled. Some had protruding bellies of water. Most were splotched brown like coffee stains. I counted the stains on beat to the thunderous metronome behind my ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Lucas already gathered himself enough to survey the room. His footsteps and the rattle of chained exit doors were the only sounds. I pinched my eyes shut and took a deep breath before I sat up to look around. Computers were spaced out on 2 long tables in the far corner of the room, just expensive dust collectors without power. A cluster of organized tables and chairs stood close by. The rest of the room was books. Aisles and aisles of sturdy wooden bookshelf, each stuffed with the bane of the school's former attendees, all of which had acquired the pleasing smell of aged paper. There was an indention in the carpet at the end of the nearest aisle, the distinct print of a bookshelf where there wasn't one to be found. Lucas chuckled like he'd figured out the punchline to an unfunny prank. He waved at you. He said, I didn't have to look at him. I could feel his burning eyes on me. Fist your locker, and now he waves at you. I didn't know. I signed. I tried to suck the tears back, but they already started to pool. Who is he? I'm sure you know that, don't you? He snarled. I could only glance at him. His anger burned, but his quivering lips showed that the fire was fueled by fear. I couldn't say anything. Of course I had no idea he would be here, but if I told them who he was, would they leave me? The only other friend I ever had was stalking halls covered in a kid's blood. I would be alone again. Such an awful place. You convinced us to come here. You wanted to get something, and you sure as shit got it, didn't you? What did we do to deserve this, Holly? I shook my head violently to dodge his accusation. The pools in my eyes overflowed before Abigail saw what was happening and jumped between us. Lucas, we are stuck here. All 3 of us, and if we want to get out, we can't be an asshole. We need some trust. Okay. Abigail signed to him. Lucas swallowed some of his hatred and thought. His sister was always a soft spot. Okay, but she needs to give me a reason to. He looked past Abigail and back at me. Why are we here? He asked. The truth sounded so absurd now. I'm supposed to tell them I got us locked in with a murderer and got a boy killed over a dumb class project from over a decade ago? I couldn't make my hand say anything. She's just shy. My mother's words echoed in my head, the only words I remember her saying. Lucas scoffed and walked away from us. Abigail sat next to me and rested her shoulder and head against mine. I'm sorry about him. You don't really know that monster, do you? She signed. I wanted to tell her everything. I always wanted to tell her everything. But I couldn't shake the knot of dread that formed in my stomach at the thought of doing so. Alone, such an awful place. I didn't know was all I could sign. I'm here. She repeated to me in a calming whisper. Holly, get Abigail and come here. Lucas demanded. I composed myself the best I could and brought Abigail over. Lucas was standing in an open door. What was on the other side of the door was too dark to be an exit, far too dark. Just enough moonlight came through the windows of the library to see stairs leading down. The concrete stairs ended abruptly at a waterline. So calm, it could have been mistaken as frozen. We were concerned at first, but realized whatever microscopic horrors swam around in the flooded basement were nothing compared to the one lurking in the halls. Abigail went down first. She kept her hearing aids in a tight fist above her head and used her other hand to grab Lucas. He then offered his free hand to me. I hesitated. Trust, he said. The word made me nauseous. But I took his hand and covered our tracks by closing the door behind us. The water swallowed us from feet to navel. Darkness was all around us. All of my existence was a frigid chill soaked up through my spine, the sloshing of legs, and Lucas' grip around my wrist. All I could do was follow his pull. I fluttered my free hand through the air to find some clue as to where we were until collided with a massive tank. It rang a hollow twang after my knuckle blindly hit it. Lucas gave my arm a stern jerk, and at the same time, something coiled around my foot and tripped. I thrashed my arms beneath the water to keep my head from submerging beneath the disease-festered water. Once I regained my balance, I kicked the thing that tripped me into my hand. with the all-consuming darkness taking my vision, I ran my fingers over it to learn what it was. The unmoving serpentine shape ended in an open mouth with rivets for lips. A hose, I realized. I also realized that I wasn't being pulled anymore. There were no fingers wrapped around my wrist. Lucas let go. Hinges squealed from further inside the room and ended with the door closed. My first instinct was to splash, to shoot my audio flare for rescue. But just as I raised my arms, I heard something else. 2 claps. I knew it wasn't them. The sound was too thick, too expecting. Trunkless waited for me to fill in my part. I stayed silent. My feet were anchored to the floor, and I hoped that Abigail and Lucas did the same, wherever they were. Something stepped into the water, and I pinched every muscle in my face to keep a yelp from escaping. The water stilled after a moment. Clap, clap. My nerves prodded every muscle in my body to flee. My resolve was failing, but before it completely caved, I escaped in thought. I thought of Abigail, and I finding a way out of the school. I thought of leaving this place in a cloud of dust behind our tires and going to concert. Abigail loved concerts. The crowd pounded the beat into the ground. The speakers blasted the music until it rattled in her chest. The sound was all-encompassing, to the point that even without ears, she could hear it. I imagined dancing with her in the crowd. It was one of the places we felt included, like the world was made to fit us in, like I wasn't alone. Clap, clap. The sound snapped me out of thought with a boom to my eardrum. I shrieked and tried to run, but his hands quickly crushed my upper arm. He dragged me behind him through the water. I struggled to get my mouth above the water for air. Drowning became my biggest worry until I heard the thud of his boot hit a stair through the splashes. He hoisted me out of the water like I weighed nothing. The hinges squealed again, and just before he threw me into the unknown, I caught a glimpse of Lucas as he pulled Abigail back into the moonlit library. Story 9. If you are a parent who has lost a child, I want to tell you this. As a professor, for 30 years, I have devoted myself to the study of death legends and cultures across Europe, recording funeral customs, resurrection myths, and tales of ferrying the dead with the detached precision demanded by academic rigor. I have researched Viking ship burials, Welsh sin-eaters, and the peculiar phenomenon of the wild hunt persisting in Germanic territories. I never imagined these academic pursuits would become my autobiography, nor that I would be summoned to witness what I can only describe as the hand of God operating in tangible form in our fallen world. My daughter Viola died on March 16th of this year, exactly 8 months after her cancer diagnosis. The oncologist called it glioblastoma multiforme, always using the full Latin name, as if formal medical terminology could contain the horror embedded in those words. She was only 23, a cellist in an orchestra. When she passed, I held her hand in a hospice in Warwickshire, pretending the morphine-induced calm on her face was not her true death. I had not prayed in 20 years. My academic work had thoroughly eradicated the remnants of faith from my Church of England upbringing. I studied religious narratives as cultural products, resurrection myths as psychological mechanisms for coping with grief. When the hospital chaplain offered to pray with us, I politely but firmly declined. My wife, Catherine, nodded gratefully, understanding my refusal. We were both rationalists. We faced death like materialists, with a dignified acceptance of annihilation. The funeral proceeded routinely, Church of England rites, but it felt purely performative, an empty ceremony to comfort elderly relatives. Cremation, followed by a respectable memorial at the University Club. Colleagues from the anthropology department offered condolences with awkward sincerity. They were more accustomed to studying dead cultures than confronting raw, personal loss. My wife, Catherine, managed everything with efficient administrative competence. She organized, responded, thanked everyone for coming. Yes, it was sudden. She suffered little. I nodded and shook hands, calmly observing my own numbness as if from a comfortable academic distance. In the empty weeks that followed, my research took a new direction, accompanied, though I did not realize at the time, by the first stirrings of what I can only call grace. I found myself unable to continue the monograph I was laboring over on agricultural folk rituals. The materials seemed irrelevant. The arguments I had constructed suddenly revealed their impracticality. When Viola was reduced to ashes in a biodegradable urn on Catherine's bedside table, what did it matter whether the abbot's Bromley horn dance originated from Celtic deer worship or later Norman hunting customs? So I began pulling different books from the shelves. Stories of resurrection, cosmologies of the afterlife, the mechanisms by which human cultures attempt to reconcile the boundary between life and death. But now I read differently. Where once I had cataloged these beliefs with anthropological detachment, now I began searching for patterns, for commonalities that might suggest something beyond mere cultural construction. The story of Lazarus particularly confounded me. I had always interpreted it as typical Johannine theological embellishment, a miracle story foreshadowing Christ's resurrection. But rereading it, I was struck by details I had overlooked. The 4 days in the tomb, the explicit mention of decay, the sister's desperate faith. What if these details were not embellishments but documentary? What if the author of John's Gospel was recording something that actually happened? My research began to uncover strange phenomena. Across vastly different cultural contexts, resurrection narratives shared structural elements with consistency that seemed to exceed narrative convention. The name of the deceased must be repeated. Specific lunar phases are observed. Blood offerings are ubiquitous. The resurrected often return in a transformed state, possessing what scriptures describe as divine or angelic qualities. What if these commonalities did not point, as I had always assumed, to universal psychological patterns, but to something more literal? What if humanity, across ages and civilizations, had truly discovered mechanisms for breaching the boundary between life and death? Catherine noticed a shift in my research focus. "Thomas, this is unhealthy," she said one evening at 2 a.m., finding me at my desk surrounded by open books. "Grief takes many forms, but obsession—" "This is not obsession," I replied. Calmly, I thought. I was merely exploring a new avenue. The evidence for resurrection beliefs across cultures was startlingly consistent. My prior work had been too dismissive, too quick to pronounce. These are just symbolic narratives. She looked at me. Her eyes seemingly cried dry weeks ago. You're trying to find a way to bring her back. I want to understand why every culture believes it's possible. It's a legitimate academic question. But perhaps she was right. Perhaps the way I was reading, cross-referencing, poring over obscure journals and interlibrary loan requests, carried a particular desperation, as if searching for a pattern, a key clue I had missed before. Perhaps, though I would not admit it then, I had begun to hope these patterns pointed to something real. It was in this state that I first encountered mention of the Codex Resurrectorum. The reference appeared in a footnote in a 1923 article in the Journal of the Folklore Society by one Cartwright. I did not know the name. The article itself concerned apocryphal saint legends in the English Midlands, but Cartwright mentioned a manuscript in possession of a private collector in Birmingham containing extremely bizarre and theologically incoherent accounts of resurrection, either a medieval joke or confused memories of Celtic mythology erroneously recorded by later Christian scribes. Cartwright noted in particular that the text claimed Christ himself had died twice, once at Golgotha and again decades later in Asia Minor, and that only through the second death and resurrection did he achieve full divinity. It is difficult to imagine a more thorough heresy, Cartwright wrote. Yet the manuscript presents these claims with the calm authority of chronicle rather than mystical vision. The footnote offered no further details. I could find no other publications by Edmund Cartwright. The British Library Catalogue had no entry for Codex Resurrectorum. Exhaustive searches of manuscript databases yielded nothing. Had I not been in a state of heightened receptivity to such curiosities, I might have dismissed it entirely. But the claim of Christ's double death lingered in my mind. Absurd, of course, contravening all canonical texts and creeds. Yet it had a compelling quality. What if the resurrection narratives we possess are incomplete? What if there exist oppressed traditions, predating Roman incursion, containing practical methodologies rather than theological abstractions? Through a university contact in Birmingham, I learned of the Ashford Collection, a private library assembled in the late Victorian era by industrial magnate Harold Ashford and largely preserved intact by his descendants. I discovered Ashford had been a spiritualist and comparative religionist. He was particularly interested in so-called practical theology, the application of religious principles to tangible outcomes. The current curator was initially reluctant to allow a visit. Mr. Ashford's interests were somewhat unusual, she explained over the phone. The family prefers a collection remain private. I persisted. I may have mentioned Viola. I may have framed my research to Mrs. Peabody as grief-related bibliotherapy rather than serious scholarship. In any case, I was eventually granted an afternoon. Ashford House in Edgbaston was a sprawling Victorian Gothic pile, testifying to former industrial wealth and eccentric collecting. The lady, a stern woman in her 60s, led me through rooms of glass cases filled with fossils, taxidermy, and dubious Egyptian artifacts to the library. Mr. Ashford had some peculiar hobbies, she said, gesturing at the shelves. Spiritualism, theosophy, comparative religion, and some genuine medieval manuscripts, I suspect acquired through less than legitimate channels. Everything is cataloged in a rather idiosyncratic way. The manuscript section is in the corner. The Codex Resurrectum was filed under Theological Curiosities. It was smaller than I expected. Perhaps 40 vellum leaves bound in what appeared to be 18th century leather, though the manuscript itself was clearly older. The Latin was medieval. The hand consisted of 13th or 14th century English scribes. Marginal annotations appeared in what looked like Elizabethan secretary hand, later supplemented with Victorian English notes, probably Ashford's own. I photographed every page on my phone, aware she was hovering disapprovingly nearby, making my time limited. Only later, back in my Coventry study, did I begin reading it seriously. As Cartwright had said, the text was profoundly strange. It began with what seemed a conventional account of the Passion and Resurrection. Thoughtfully rendered, it diverged sharply from the canonical Gospels. But then it advanced claims I had never seen in any apocryphon. According to the Codex, Christ did indeed rise on the third day and appear to the disciples. But the resurrection was incomplete. He returned to earthly life, not eternal life. He remained subject to death. The text claimed Christ lived another 37 years, traveling East Ephesus and beyond, teaching a small circle of disciples the true science of resurrection. Then at age 70, he died again, not violently, but peacefully, and was buried by these secret followers. But the text insisted that on the third day after the second death, he rose again, this time fully. He became the twice-made divine, divinus eteritus, no longer subject to death or decay, existing in a perfected form beyond human limitations. By orthodox standards, this theology was absurd. It undermined the hypostatic union of divine and human natures, suggesting Christ was not fully divine during his ministry. It contradicted the ascension narrative. It was not presented as allegory or mystical vision, but as meticulous historical chronicle with geographical details and witness names. More shocking was the Codex's description of the double resurrection mechanism. It presented this as a paradigmatic process, not a singular miracle, a pattern replicable under proper conditions. The Codex emphasized that Christ had shown the way. Through specific commemorations, namings, and sacrificial rites, death itself could be reversed. This was not merely the soul's redemption in some abstract afterlife, but true bodily resurrection, a genuine return to life, transformed and perfected. The text included detailed instructions, ritual structures, specific linguistic formulae, and requirements for timing, location, and offerings. It was less a theological treatise than a technical manual, a recipe for crossing the boundary between life and death. I should have recognized this as typical medieval religious syncretism, Christian narrative mixed with folk magic, ultimately theological nonsense. I had seen similar texts before, grimoires and enchiridions blending liturgical fragments with pagan incantations. Yet I read it again and again, because in the depths of my grieving chest, a faint voice whispered, "What if it is true?" I was trained to recognize patterns. That is the essence of folklore studies. Identifying recurring themes across cultures and periods, mapping how narratives evolve in transmission between communities, analyzing how symbolic structures encode social meaning. The Codex Resurrectorum contained patterns I knew. The naming vigil it described resembled ancestral customs in numerous cultures: the Roman Lemuralia, Chinese ancestor veneration, Mexican Dia de los Muertos. The blood requirement echoed Levitical sacrifice, Vedic rites, Greek mystery religions. The lunar timing aligned with agricultural festivals worldwide. What if these similarities did not stem from humanity universally constructing similar myths, but from humanity universally discovering fragments of a real methodology? What if the Codex was not medieval fantasy, but preserved ancient knowledge, a true spiritual science suppressed by the Christian establishment as too dangerous, too powerful, too easily abused? I began testing the Codex's methodology, telling myself it was purely an intellectual exercise. The naming vigil required reciting, in chronological order, every memory of the deceased from birth to death. This must be done in a specific location, ideally where the person died, but alternatively a space closely associated with them. The recitation must be complete, omitting no significant memory, and conducted over consecutive nights following the Codex's lunar calendar. Viola's room remained largely as she left it. Catherine had boxed some clothes for donation, disposed of the cancer medications, but kept the rest: books, photos, the small wooden music stand she used for practice. The cello sat in its case in the corner, untouched since diagnosis. I could conduct the ritual there. Catherine need not know. I began in early May, timing the vigils to what the Codex called the Dark Ascension, the nights following the new moon when the veil between yin and yang worlds was thinnest. Before beginning, I purified the space as instructed. I lit 12 candles, one for each apostle, then recited the incantation, a variant of Veni Creator Spiritus with strange alterations. Then I began weaving Viola's life into the words. Memories. She was born 23 years ago at Walsgrave Hospital. How she looked, cheeks red with crying, furious at the cold world. Catherine weeping with joy, exhausted, beholding my daughter's tiny form, terrified of her fragility. Her baptism at Holy Trinity Church, though I did not believe in the rite's efficacy then. But now I recall the priest's words. We received this child in the Christ flock, and wondered if those words had marked her for some purpose I did not understand. I recounted her childhood with ethnographic precision, yet laced with emotion I could not suppress. Her first word, bird, pointing at pigeons in the garden. Her obsession with horses at 5. Discovering the cello at 8. It seemed too large for her at first, then suddenly fitting. That Christmas, she played a simple silent night for us. Catherine and I exchanged glances, realizing our daughter had found her calling. The changes were subtle at first. I attributed them to psychological projection, the well-documented phenomenon of grief, hallucinations in bereaved parents. On the 7th night, I smelled her perfume, the Asian sandalwood she loved most. On the 10th, I heard what sounded like cello string resonance, overtones lingering in the air though no one played. On the 13th night, only now do I note the number, at 3 a.m., I woke convinced someone stood at my study door watching me work. 3 a.m. In Catholic tradition, the hour of mercy. In some accounts, the hour of Christ's agony. The hour when the veil between worlds is thinnest. I began keeping detailed records, and I began to pray. It felt strange at first, awkward, the words rusty from disuse. I had not prayed since university, and even then perfunctorily. But now I found myself addressing God, tentatively at first, then with growing conviction, asking whether what I experienced was real, whether I was being led or deceived, whether this work was sacred or profane. I received no verbal answer, but the signs grew stronger. She was guiding me. The perfume grew stronger, concentrated near Viola's music stand. Impossible as residual scent after months. The cello sound became more frequent. Always specific phrases Viola practiced, never random notes. Objects in her room began to move, at first minor. A photo I had placed face down turned over. a book open to a specific page. Sheet music arranged in Viola's habitual difficulty order. Catherine noticed I was not sleeping. "You're not sleeping," she said. "You look terrible, Thomas. You need to see Dr. Albright." "I sleep well enough," I replied, not entirely a lie. I did sleep, but only after the vigils, usually at dawn. My dreams were vivid, filled with medieval resurrection paintings I vaguely remembered. Christ stepping from the tomb, Mary Magdalene in the garden, Lazarus stumbling out in grave clothes. "What are you doing in there?" She meant Viola's room. She had not entered since the funeral. "I'm praying," I said, surprised to find it true. She studied my face. I could not read her expression. Worry mixed with something else. Perhaps fear. "You haven't prayed in 20 years. I was wrong not to. I was wrong about many things. Thomas, please. This is grief. It's making you think that God might actually exist, that resurrection might actually happen." Yes, it was making me think these things. I was beginning to believe I had been blind, willfully so, hiding behind academic detachment to avoid confronting ultimate questions. She left the room without replying. I continued the vigils with renewed purpose. The text warned that the process would produce what it called manifestations, videntia. As the vigils continued, these visions or presences would grow clearer. The text emphasized these were not hallucinations, but the initial condensations of resurrection itself. The dead were returning, but not yet fully. They existed in what the text called the interworld, intermundus, the liminal space between death and rebirth, the space Christ occupied from Friday afternoon to Sunday morning. On the 21st night, completing 3 weeks of nights, the first naming cycle of the text, I finally saw her. She stood by the window, silhouetted against the streetlight. She was not fully corporeal. More disturbance in the air, a place where reality seemed slightly condensed, but unmistakably Viola. The angle of her head, the set of her shoulders, the figure was both intimately familiar and utterly impossible. I spoke her name. The figure turned toward me. Though I could not see her face clearly, I felt a current of recognition pass between us. "Viola," I said again, adding this time, "in the name of Christ who conquered death, I call you back." The words came unbidden, not from the ancient book, but from somewhere deeper, from a knowledge I did not realize I possessed. The figure lingered a moment, then dissipated like morning mist. I fell to my knees weeping, not from grief, but from an inexpressible certainty. She was there. She was responding. The boundary between life and death was not absolute. The ancient book was truth. Christ's conquest of death was not metaphor, but real power, accessible and applicable under proper conditions. For the first time since Viola's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt hope, and more than hope, I felt the presence of God, working miracles through my feeble efforts. The Codex stipulated that the second naming rite must be conducted differently. The first rite reconstructed deceased earthly life. The second required what the text called divine namings, nomina divinitatis, naming divinity. The practitioner must speak not memories but attributes, must transform biographical recollection into something closer to litany or doxology. I understood what this meant. I must describe not who Viola had been, but what she was becoming to the power of resurrection. I must narrate her transfiguration, paving the way for her return, just as Christ's resurrection paved the way for the general resurrection at the end of days. This process now felt less like academic inquiry, less like applying folkloric methods to an interesting text. It felt like participation in sacred mystery. Each night of vigil, I began with Veni Creator Spiritus, invoking the Holy Spirit to guide my words, to make me a worthy vessel for this work. On the next new moon, I began the second cycle. I no longer recounted memories, but spoke attributes. I described Viola's goodness, her keen intelligence, her capacity for joy. I enumerated her talents, her courage, her singular beauty, hers. But I spoke not of past qualities, but present and eternal realities. The aspects of her soul death could not erase. Her music was prayer. I surprised myself saying one night, when she played, she unknowingly praised God. Every note was worship. She was holy without knowing it. The codex demanded more than eulogy. It required ascribing what it called post-mortem merits, Marita post-mortem, merits beyond death, quality sufficient to justify resurrection. I must explain why Viola deserved return, why reality itself should bend for her resurrection. This was difficult. By what right did I claim my daughter merited resurrection more than the millions of other unjust deaths daily? I struggled for nights, stammering, uncertain of my ground. Then, on the 9th night of the second cycle, I heard a voice. I do not mean metaphorically. I heard a real voice, clear and authoritative, resonating in my mind. It said, "She is mine. I marked her from birth. Her death is not ending but transformation. You are called to witness the return of a saint." I trembled, prostrating myself. "Lord," I whispered, scarcely daring to hope this was truly God speaking to me. The voice came again. "You have been faithful in small things. Now I show you great things. Continue the work. Do not doubt. What I have joined, death cannot separate." I wept then, overwhelmed by grace and awe. It was settled. God had spoken to me. God was confirming this work. I was not deluded. I was not mad. I was participating in a genuine miracle, witnessing firsthand resurrection power Christ released into the world. From that night, I spoke in the vigils with new authority. I no longer petitioned or hoped. I declared, proclaimed, cooperated with divine will. She appeared more frequently now, always in a half-manifest state, always untouchable yet increasingly clear. Her face became more defined, then her face. No longer gone for morphine as at the end, but younger, healthier, somehow flawless. Her features took on the clarity of icons, simple and noble. The cello sound grew louder, more complex. Sometimes I heard complete phrases of pieces she loved, the opening of the St. Saëns concerto, fragments of Bach suites. But sometimes I heard music I had never heard, impossibly beautiful, polyphonic textures far beyond what a single cello could produce. She is learning to play in heaven. I realized suddenly one night, speaking aloud, she is being tutored by angels, and she practices here in the space between worlds. The voice came again. "Yes, you understand now. Death is not ending but schooling. She is being perfected, prepared for return." I began reading scripture voraciously, the first time since a brief stint in divinity school during graduate studies. But I read differently now, not as cultural artifact, but as living text. The resurrection stories blaze with new meaning. Lazarus stumbling from the tomb in grave clothes, Christ appearing to Mary in the garden, Thomas touching Jesus' wounds. These were not metaphors or myths, but records of actual events proving death's boundary could be crossed. I studied Paul's epistles with particular attention. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians, "Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting?" I had always read this as metaphorical hope, poetic consolation. Now I understood it as direct ontological description. Christ had indeed conquered death. The power was here. The way was open. One morning, Catherine found me asleep at my desk, the room icy because I had left the window open all night. Candles burned the stubs around me. She confronted me again. "Thomas," this has to stop. "You're making yourself ill. Please talk to someone." I am talking to someone. I am talking to God. And God is answering. She stepped back, fear flashing across her face. "Listen to yourself. This is psychosis, Thomas. Grief-induced psychosis. A doctor can prescribe something. I don't need medication. I need you to have faith. Viola is coming back, Catherine. God has promised. I have seen the signs. I have heard his voice. This is real. Viola is dead," she shouted now. I rarely heard her raise her voice. "She is dead, Thomas. She is ashes in an urn. No amount of prayer, medieval nonsense, or delusion changes that." I looked at my wife, pitying her unbelief. "You're like the Apostle Thomas," I said softly. "You will not believe until you see. But that's all right. You will see. Soon you will see her return, and then you will believe." "I want to leave here," she said suddenly, her tone flat. "Pack your bags. Go to your office or a hotel. I can't watch this anymore. I can't watch you descend into madness. I am not mad, Catherine. I am clearer now than ever. I finally understand what is true. Then prove it. Show me evidence. Something more than your deteriorating mental state. You will have evidence. When Viola returns, you'll have all the evidence you need. Until then, if you wish, I can leave. But I will not abandon the work. I am too close. The third cycle begins in 3 days. That afternoon, I left with a suitcase, moving into my university office. My colleagues avoided me. I was aware I had missed weeks of lectures, ignored emails, absented myself from meetings. I vaguely knew I was likely to be dismissed, but it did not matter. My true work was not academic. My calling was sacred. According to the Codex, the third and final cycle required what the text called the ultimate dedication, dedicatio culminatus. The practitioner must offer part of himself, must sacrifice some of his own life force to complete the resurrection. The text compared this to Christ's passion, suggesting all resurrections require blood sacrifice. Life poured out that life might be reborn. The instructions were specific, drawing heavily on Levitical sacrifice imagery. For 7 consecutive nights, I must cut a vein, the text suggested the left wrist, symbolizing Christ's wound, and let blood drip onto an object belonging to the deceased. While the blood fell, I must not speak of the dead, but of what I was willing to sacrifice for their rebirth. I must offer myself, becoming the bridge between life and death as Christ had been. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. I quoted Hebrews on the first night of the third cycle as I prepared. I had everything ready: Viola's cello bow, a clean razor blade, bandages. I lit the 12 candles and added a 13th for Christ himself. I understood I was crossing a line. I understood that from a secular perspective, I was self-harming under religious delusion. But I also understood that Abraham had been willing to sacrifice Isaac, that God had sacrificed his only son. That religious history is a history of sacrifice. The secular world had long forgotten the wisdom of the ancients. The sacred requires sacrifice. Transformation demands cost. Life is only gained through death. I used Viola's bow, the one she used in her last performance before diagnosis. I made a small cut on my left wrist, letting blood drip onto the white horsehair, while speaking words that welled up as if given by the voice guiding me through this journey. Lord, accept my offering, my blood for her life, my sacrifice for her return. As Christ bled for the world, I bleed for my daughter. Let this be acceptable to you. Let this complete the redemptive work you have begun. The pain was negligible. In candlelight, the blood looked black, pooling on the white hair. I watched it drip, and Viola's presence intensified dramatically. She appeared in the center of the room, more substantial than before. I could see her face clearly, beautiful, perfect, radiating inner light. Her eyes open, gazing at me with an expression I can only describe as love transfigured. "Daddy," she said, her voice Viola's but different, carrying a resonance beyond the physical. "Viola," I cried, tears streaming. "You're coming back. God is bringing you back." "Yes," she said, smiling impossibly. "You've been so faithful. Just a little longer. It is almost complete." Each night of that final week, I repeated the ritual, carefully making small cuts to avoid serious injury, yet provide the required blood offering. Each night Viola became more real, more clear, more vividly herself yet transformed. By the 7th night, I could see her fully. She stood in the room's center, fully present, fully visible, but her transformation filled me with awe. Her face retained Viola's features, yet possessed the awe-inspiring beauty of medieval saint portraits. Simple, perfect, no longer merely human. Her eyes too large, too bright, her proportions subtly altered, as if gently reshaped the divine rather than human genetics. She wore white, but I could not tell if it was clothing or some radiance emanating from within her, shining outward. Around her head, I seemed to see a halo, or perhaps light bending strangely around her presence. "The resurrection is complete," she said, her voice now containing multitudes, as if a choir spoke through her. "I have returned as he promised. I am made new." I knelt in worship, Not to her, but to the God who worked this miracle through her. Praise God. I choked. Praise Christ who conquered death. Praise the Holy Spirit who guided me. This is your work, Lord. This is your glory. Viola, or what she had become, extended a hand that seemed to pass through solid matter as through air. Rise, Father. You must witness what I am now. You must tell the world what God can do. You must be my apostle. I rose trembling, barely able to stand. I will tell everyone. I will show them the codex. Explain the process. Resurrection is possible. Death is not the end. Oh, God, this changes everything. Yes, she said, her smile impossibly radiant. Everything is changed. I am the firstfruits, as he was the firstfruits. Others will follow. Death itself will be conquered. The kingdom is coming. Father, the kingdom is at hand. I write these words not for an academic paper, but as testimony, witnessing what God has done in these last days. I write this in hope that those grieving, who have lost loved ones, may understand. Death is not the end. Through faith and the proper application of divinely revealed methods, resurrection is not merely promised for a distant Eshedin, but available now, in our time. She is with me always now. She no longer remains in one location, but appears wherever I am, whenever I need her. Sometimes she manifests as she was in life, my daughter, my flesh and blood, but more often in her glorified form, radiating resurrection light. Speaking truths I scarcely understand yet know to be divine. She has explained what happened to her in death. She was not annihilated, not unconscious. She existed in what she calls a waiting place, a realm where souls are prepared for resurrection. There she was taught by angels, saints, even Christ himself. She learned the nature of reality, the structure of creation, the mechanics of resurrection. When my vigils opened the way, when my blood sacrifice completed the offering, she was able to return, not to her old life, but to a new one, transformed. This is what Christ accomplished on the cross, she tells me. Not merely forgiveness of sins, but true victory over death. Not only for final judgment, but for now. The power is here, Father. The way is open. You must help others understand. I have tried to explain this to people. My university colleagues either ignore my emails or suggest extended leave. When I try to tell friends of the transformation wrought by the Codex Resurrectorum, they stop taking my calls. Catherine has filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order, claiming I am a danger to myself and others. So I must write this here. Story 10. I'm being conscripted by a country that doesn't exist. No one hated war more than I did. I was as pacifist as they come, which was great, since war wasn't something I had to worry about. I'd watch my fellow classmates signing up for the military in our final year of high school, the way in which military recruiters would ply them with promises of honor, duty, or money. None of that came close to working on me. I was grateful to be from a country that didn't have a military draft. I wasn't going to trade my freedom, serenity, or possibly life for anything. The notion of young men and women going away to faraway lands to violently kill others, many of them innocents, disturbed me to my core. On my college campus, I was always out campaigning against war crimes and advocating for peace. I was a regular hippie archetype, right down to the long hair and sandals, the furthest thing you could imagine from a soldier. Yet, like so many hippies from decades past, my world changed one day when I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was ordinary, save for one detail. The stamp on the top right corner was a mixture of strange symbols that I had never seen before. Pulling out of my dorm mailbox, I wonder how a stamp like that had even been accepted by the post office. I pulled out the letter inside and instantly assumed from the layout of the words that I'd gotten some kind of fine. I must have run a red light. Without even realizing, I cursed to myself. Then I started reading the letter, and my frustration turned into bewilderment. The wording was formal and addressed me like it was coming from the government, but there was no way that the Australian government had sent me this. Greetings, Mr. Allen. Please be advised that, in light of our nation's escalating war with enemy nations, we have reinstated mandatory conscription for our pool of able citizens. You are hereby notified that you, a male citizen of the nation of Extorvis between the ages of 18 and 30, have been selected for military training and service around. I scoffed in disbelieving amusement. What a silly prank. I had a reputation on campus for being a peacemaker or fusenik, and someone who saw me probably thought this was a perfect gag. Good to know at least people are paying attention, even if they're assholes, I thought. Yet, even despite the clear absurdity of the letter, something about it felt so real, so authentic. It was just how government letters were written in real life, down to the font and formatting. I kept reading. You are to report for active duty in 2 months' time of receipt of this letter. Enclosed is one map and token for purposes of your travels to said induction station at the location listed below. It is your obligation to inform any relatives, loved ones, and employers of your conscription, and make arrangements for the duration for which you will be deployed. This period is subject to high command discretion and may range from 2 to 2,000 years. Willful failure to report promptly to this location at the hour and on the day specified in this notice will violate the Mandatory Training and Service Act of 103,472 and will subject you to immediate arrest, imprisonment, and corporal punishment. Be warned that no leniency will be granted to any who choose to ignore this directive. Signed, Extorvis Military Commander on the signature line. Instead, a legible name was an indecipherable scribble in purple ink that cannot have been in English. Hell, it didn't look like any other language I'd seen either. And that country's name, Extorvis. In all my education, I'd never heard of it before. I certainly wasn't a citizen of it. What's that? Asked my preppy roommate, who had been regarding my befuddled expression at the letter with curiosity. Just more evidence that not even our delinquents are smart here at Melview. I said, dumbass don't even know any real countries to prank me with. I showed him the letter, and his reaction was just as incredulous as mine had been. Godspeed and Extorvis, bro, he joked, slapping the paper back into my hand. I know you'll be their finest soldier. That night, I looked up the nation of Extorvis on Wikipedia just to be sure, and sure enough, it was as non-existent as it was ridiculous. Nor was a strange, ominous nation anywhere on the globe in a campus library. A few weeks passed by, and I tried to forget about the bizarre prank letter. I knew it was fake, knew it had to be fake, and yet every day that passed made me feel uneasier, as if some invisible clock was ticking down, and my drafting date really was drawing near. I brushed it off as concern about the prankster escalating this, and sending me something worse. To put my mind at ease, I took the strange letter to the local post office. Surely they could tell me if the letter was actually sent from there, and if so, who had really sent it. The sender's address on the envelope had just been another mixture of strange symbols like the stamp and signature, besides the word Extorvis. So I was in the dark. I'd half expected the post office worker to laugh me out of the building when I showed him the letter. I didn't expect him to go quiet and stare at me like I was a walking missile target. Can you tell me who really sent this, or what? I asked impatiently. The balding postal worker steadied himself and explained in hushed tones. Look, this letter is indeed a real government order. The sender was the party marked on the address. If I was you, I'd report for duty like it says. It's much worse for those who don't. You might have a chance if you do. Also, it is a federal offense to disobey it. Are you kidding me? How can I report to the military of a fictional place? Extorvis doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in this reality, was all he hissed back to me. And before I could get another word in, he was on to the next customer. What the hell? Now I was definitely feeling anxious about the mysterious draft letter. Could what he said really be true? I hopped online again, but this time headed straight for the internet forums instead of academic sources. If this letter had really been sent to others before, like the postal worker implied, then someone would have asked the same questions I'm asking now. Where's the country Extorvis? Why am I being drafted by them? How dangerous is serving in their military? What exactly is it I'll be fighting? When will I be discharged? Who has successfully evaded their draft? My forum posts were only live for an hour when I received a short, private message from someone in response. Are they drafting you too? I hurriedly messaged back my confirmation. Their next message came almost instantly. Can we meet? Meeting up with a stranger over the internet, who I'd only briefly messaged with, who might be potentially crazy, was not the smartest action in the world. But I knew that no one else would believe me. That go to family and friends would just get my fears dismissed. To them, I would be the potentially crazy one. Hermit99 sent me an out-of-the-way address to meet him at an empty warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was every bit as dodgy as I thought it might be as I walked into the cramped, abandoned space filled with packing crates. Through the rays of sunlight that streamed in from the rafters, I saw a decrepit figure crouched over a laptop. That had to be him. You're Hugo, right? He snapped at me, looking up for his charging laptop. I'm Leroy. You shut the door behind you, right? I nodded, starting to wonder if this was a bad idea. Show me your letter, he barked in panic. He practically snatched it out of my hands, skimming it over like someone who had spent many hours doing the same before. Dude, what gives? I asked in frustration. Why don't you tell me what the hell is happening to us? Why am I being drafted by some weird country that I have nothing to do with? He looked at me incredulously. Nothing to do with? If they sent you this draft letter, then you're a distant descendant of a being that makes you a citizen in their eyes. Like me. So, you're a citizen of this place too. Then I ask, try to wrap my head around the idea that one of my ancestors was an interdimensional being. Yes, unlike most descendants, my family always knew we had a drop of Extorvis blood. I dedicated years to trying to research that realm, and then my letter came in the mail. Leroy trailed off for a moment before startling out of it and continuing. Extorvis exists in another dimension. From what I've learned about it, it's not like Earth. It's vast and dark and brutal. Conflict between civilizations in that plane is constant. Wars that are massive in scale, comprising millions upon millions of beings battling with ancient weapons for years. Death there takes longer. When things get really bad, they recruit from their pool on Earth. Ergo us. My tension growing at what he just told me, I decided to speed things along. Okay, gotcha. We're both in the firing line for some spectral war in hell. So, how do we get out of it? Leroy flipped my letter over and pointed at the fine print on the other side. Persons due to report may be disqualified from service due to inhibiting injury or active service in a separate military. Injury? Were we really about to start giving each other bone spurs? It seemed like it. I need someone to torture me. So badly that I'm deemed unfit for active duty, he said, gesturing to an array of construction tools on a bench next to him. My draft date was yesterday and I'm overdue. We need to act quick. I picked up a bolt cutter and tried steeling myself up to what I was about to do. Before I could go any further, however, a whirling wind knocked out of my hands. Almost on cue, shadowy, humanoid figures began appearing throughout the warehouse. Everything he said was right. Leroy's time had run out. Petrified, I ducked behind crate. From there, I witnessed it. The vague, darkened beings grabbing Leroy's screaming frame, hauling him to his feet and vanishing, undoubtedly back to whatever incomprehensible punishment awaited him in Extorvia. What's worse is they'd waited to detain him until I was there, to show me firsthand the consequences of desertion. I sat there for hours in the empty warehouse, alone and thinking. There was no way I would be able to injure myself badly enough to be excluded from the draft, which meant I had only one other option remaining. That day, I returned home and enlisted in the Australian Army. It took several weeks for the process to go through and my confirmation to return to me. I waited with bated breath, every day expecting those shadowy soldiers to appear in my dorm room and take me away. But 2 days before my drafting date, there came that miracle letter. Another government letter telling me I was to be a soldier, but this time a welcome mercy instead of a death sentence. My drafting date came and passed without incident as I prepared and departed for military training at the boot camp. As per the drafting notice, I couldn't be conscripted if I was an active member of another nation's military. All this time I had hated the thought of serving my country. And in the end, it had been the loophole that saved me. Truth be told, serving in my human military over the following changed my attitude about war here on Earth. It gave me purpose, discipline, and focus that perhaps I had lacked before. The people I met were friendly and loyal, and I developed bonds with them that ran deep. I was grateful to be able to serve in this mortal realm instead of the demonic Extorvis one. After several years of contented service, my leg was eventually injured in an IED bombing. Thankfully, I didn't lose my ability to walk, but the injury was bad enough for me to be honorably discharged. I returned home a physically changed, but mentally improved man. And that's when another conscription letter came along from Extorvis. I considered the possibility of this. I hadn't considered that the appeal letter I sent them, on account of my injured leg, would be rejected. I am still expected to report for active duty in Extorvis in 2 months, according to the appeal letter. I hadn't read the fine print about disqualifying injuries. Finally, I understand why Leroy had specifically wanted me to torture him instead of just cripple him. He wanted me to injure his soul, not his flesh. Wars in Extorvis aren't fought with soldiers' bodies. They're fought with souls.